For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. Hey guys, it's me. It's SFT. It looks like we're getting a lot of good feedback from these double feature nights that we have been hosting and premiering almost nightly. I'd highly recommend watching the double feature nights that we've had so far. If you haven't had a chance, check our playlist titled Double Feature Night. Now tonight's going to be a good one. It's more of a triple treat. We've got my debate with Adam Heap, as well as the two debates that Dr. Ken Hovind had with Adam Heap. Our next double feature night is going to be broken up into two parts. We're really excited. It's the debates between Dr. Ken Hovind and T-Jump, as well as my debate with T-Jump, and of course Bill Morgan's debate with T-Jump, all involving creation, evolution, and more specifically with Bill Morgan and T-Jump, dinosaurs. Like I said, that one will be broken up into two parts and therefore two nights. Okay guys, enjoy.
Hey, welcome to Modern Day Debates. Very embarrassing, and I'm very sorry. We just had a technical issue. I've tested this many times. You've seen we have done these streams using the software with the kind of the border image, background image. And so you've seen it done before successfully. I'm not sure what it is tonight, but we're just going to use Google Hangouts, and it might be for quite a few debates until we actually have everything taken care of with that new software. We're not going back until we know it will for sure work, because we're very sorry for taking your time. And we want to say thank you for those of you who have been so gracious with us. Last night, when we had to cancel that debate, I have to be honest, I felt terrible because it was like we were excited, and I was excited for the debaters, and I was excited there were people wanting to see the debate, and I was like, man, this is awesome. And then it was like, okay, this thing is not getting off. We're not getting off the ground here. And I just want to say thank you to you people who out there, friends who were supportive and saying even Natya Witness is an atheist viewer. And you guys know this is a Christian channel probably, or at least that I'm a Christian, and we try to be nonpartisan here. But I just want to say, you know, Natya Witness, an atheist, was kind of like, hey, how can I help out? And I was like, man, that means so much. Like, I totally appreciate that. And there were others as well in the chats that were offering help or being very gracious and forgiving, which means a lot. But it just, to me, it meant so much to me that it was like, regardless of worldview, it was like atheists who are showing grace and kindness. It was Christians who are showing grace and kindness and saying, hey, is there a way I can help? And that just makes it so much easier when I have those stressful situations like being on the road yesterday, trying to get it to work. And so I want to say thank you so much. This channel is like an abstract entity that belongs to everybody who's helped so much, because everybody has helped so much in terms of like people shoot me emails or like, hey, James, like you could actually do this, or hey, James, there's you know, someone somehow on the block list, you can pull them out if you go to this on the Creator Studio. Like, I honestly am all the time, other people, all the viewers are kind of steering the steering wheel, and I appreciate so much how everybody's just been so supportive. And like I said, we're going to do Google Hangouts for a while now until we can know that the new software will consistently work. We're not going to waste anybody's time. I have no idea what it was, but we're here, and we're thankful that you're here, and we're excited for this debate nonetheless, even though it's been crazy tonight. So I want to introduce the debaters, and then what we'll do is, once we introduce the debaters, I will talk about the format. We are debating creation, evolution. And so whether you're a creationist, whether you believe in evolution, creation, whatever it is, we are stoked you're here. We want you to feel welcomed, and we want you to bring your ideas, and hopefully we get that diversity of views. So with that, I'm going to introduce the debaters. You already know Standing for Truth. He's been here before, and he's always ready to debate. He's ready to challenge people, and he's been reaching out to people, and we appreciate that. So Standing for Truth, I'm going to give you like 30 seconds just to talk about what's going on at your channel, and then I will give Adam 30 seconds to talk about what's going on at Steam Driven, his channel. And I'm going to put both of those in the new description box right now so that you can access those channels. And so without any further ado, glad to have you here standing for truth if you want to share what you've been up to.
James, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it, brother. Yeah, I think this is my fourth time on. I love your channel. I recommend it to everybody. I love how flexible you are and willing to put on these much needed debates. My channel, nothing too crazy. I'm having discussions as well. People seem to be enjoying them. They're a lot of fun. So I'd certainly recommend anyone go over there, subscribe. There's more to come. Lots of great videos, lots of great discussions in the future. I want to thank Steam or Steam Engine here for joining and filling in late notice. But yeah, overall, thanks so much, James. You're doing a great job with this channel, man.
That means a lot. Thank you for that encouragement during this stressful week. Totally appreciate it. And so also, Adam, this is your first time here, and we're really glad you're here, man. I mean, I'm glad that Standing for Truth was even talking you up. He was saying, hey, this is a well-read guy. He's smart, and he thought this is going to be just an awesome debate for everybody. So, Adam, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Standing, for suggesting me. I wasn't expecting it at all. I got it about, what, 3-4 hours ago, saying, oh, come along, have a debate with us about creation evolution. I was like, well, fine, why not? Why not indeed? My background is, currently I'm in the forces. My channel is all about comedy, skits, gaming, nothing really to do with this sort of topic, but I'm still here and I will do my best for you. Thank you.
That's awesome. So we have an eclectic mix tonight, and that's awesome, man. I'm excited to see your channel myself. So we are going to get right into the debate. So I will read just the general format. So just so you know, we're going to have 10-minute introductions from each debater, then a 10-minute rebuttal from each debater, and then we're going to have a 10-minute cross-exam. So that will be just 10 minutes for each person where they're going to be drilling the other person with questions. That's my favorite part. And then we will have 5-minute closings followed by some question and answer. So that's going to be a great time. And so thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for your support during this stressful time. Gosh, pulling my hair out. So thanks for your patience. And the Standing for Truth, we are going to give you the floor. So I'm setting the timer, and the floor is yours, Standing for Truth.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, James. Can you see my my screen here?
You bet.
Perfect. Okay, so we got biblical creation versus atheistic evolution. You know what? The evolution that I imagine we're not going to agree on has to explain how that 4-dimensional genome with multiple overlapping codes and chock full of meta information came about. The term evolution, it can mean very different things. So let's define terms here. It can mean a change over time, but I think in regards to biological evolution, it means a change in allele frequency in populations over time or over generations. Now, the type of microevolutionary variation where you get a change in the frequency of the expression of different traits is not really disputed. This type of evolution explains the survival of the fittest, but not the arrival of the fittest. This type of evolution, if you're looking at my slide here, explains the small scale variation, but not the major innovations, the major origin events or major new forms of life. Now, universal common ancestry, aka pawns come to people evolution, I believe is what we're going to disagree on in regards to the change. Now, I think it's important that you articulate your opponent's position correctly. So the tree, it's that great branching tree where the branches at the top of the tree represent the major life forms we see all around us today, while the side branches may represent various forms of life that went extinct a while back, and the root or the trunk of the tree would represent that one-celled organism at the very base of the tree, very far back in biological history, from which all the various biological forms of life are thought to have evolved or morphed or changed from that one simple form. Now, the question is, and the issue here is that cause of change. I would say mutations are destruction, not construction. And mutations in natural selection lack significant creative powers. All new innovations, structures, body plans, and novel information cannot be the result of natural selection acting upon random variation and random mutations. Now, they'll say given enough time, you'll get that population of non-dogs to turn into a population of dogs, but there's not enough time to see it. Time is no help for bacteria to biologist evolution. We're going down, not up. I find this picture funny because they'll say a frog can turn into a prince through lots of time, through lots of evolutionary processes. You know, that's science. But a frog turning into a prince instantly from the kiss of a princess, that's apparently a fairy tale. I would say they're both fairy tales. Now, a big thing here would be genome degradation or genetic entropy. If you think of it this way, we have a genome of 3 billion letters, and you take out one letter, change one letter randomly. Will you have a huge fitness effect? It's going to have a tiny fitness effect. And in fact, it's like rust on a car. You can't see each rust event, but it's continuous and destructive. We have genomic degeneration on a personal level and on a population level. We pass old and new mutations on to our kids and grandkids. It's 100 new mutations per person per generation, and nearly all non-neutral mutations are deleterious. We inherit a multitude of old mutations. Now, with this genome degradation, for numerous reasons, when it comes to rare beneficial mutations, they cannot sufficiently compensate for the relentless influx of deleterious mutations. No form of selection can stop genetic deterioration, or it can only slow it down through, say, natural selection. Now, problems not recognized by the neo-Darwinists is the limits of beneficial mutations. Natural selection is constrained by selection interference, and deleterious mutations are continuously pouring in faster than they can actually be removed. And based on what we know about the genome now, most mutations are not neutral, but are nearly neutral. Now, beneficials cannot keep up with deleterious mutations. And a lot of times you'll present examples, real-time examples of genome degradation, and they'll say, well, of course, that's inbreeding. You'd expect that. But inbreeding exposes the genetic mistakes within the genome, recessive mutations, right? Now, inbreeding, what it is it's like a sneak preview of where we are going genetically as a species. The reduced life expectancy of inbred children reflects the overall aging of the genome and reveals the hidden reservoir of genetic damage that has been accumulating. Now, the most important thing here is that genetic entropy is consistent with biblical creation. We're comparing models here. Genetic entropy is inconsistent with evolutionary theory, but consistent with the Bible, because the Bible records a time when people had extremely long lives. Now, when the lifespan of early biblical characters and their ages are actually compared, the biblical data clearly reveals an exponential decay curve. And this curve can only be described as biological. That means it must be concluded that the authors of Genesis either faithfully recorded an exponential decay of human lifespans, or they collaborated in fabricating the data using sophisticated mathematical modeling. And I find that hard to believe, because to fabricate this data would have required an advanced knowledge of mathematics, as well as a strong incentive to show exponential decay curve. So what is the most rational and logical conclusion given the empirical data? The data is real, and human life expectancy was once hundreds of years, but has progressively declined to current values. The most obvious and apparent explanation for such declining lifespans would be genetic degeneration due to mutation accumulation. Now, a lot of evolutionists will say, oh, genetic entropy has been refuted, but it has not. And when you look at rebuttals from evolutionists, whether it's Paulogia, whether it's a certain blog on the internet, letters to creationists, when fighting this truth, what the rebuttal will be, they'll speak of the obvious. Beneficials do happen. Selection does happen. Adaptation does happen. No one's disagreeing with this. Anybody with a basic understanding of genetics understands and knows these things. The argument of genetic entropy, genome degradation, only begins after acknowledging these obvious things. So let's look at some of the objections to genetic entropy. A lot of time they'll spend, and I know Jackson, we spent a lot of time saying that John Sanford misrepresented the data, misrepresented Camorra, but this is a rabbit trail. If you're looking at the slide here, John Sanford shows a larger zone of no selection than does Camorra because Camorra's analysis of the problem was oversimplified. The crucial issue is about defining the correct distribution of mutation effects. The vast majority of beneficials will be unselectable. Anybody can easily see that most mutations fall within the no selection zone and that almost all of them are deleterious. So even with strong selection, the entire zone can only undergo degeneration. Now, they'll appeal to beneficial mutations. That's what it comes down to. But due to the influx of deleterious mutations, the rare occurrence of beneficial mutations cannot compensate for the information loss. Beneficial mutations are very rare. Even evolutionists agree to this. And near neutral mutations are continuously and consistently deleterious, just as you would expect with typographical errors in a text. Most beneficial mutations are too subtle to be selected for by natural selection. Linkage group.
Minute and a half left.
Now, if you look at the examples, thank you, examples of beneficial mutations, if you're looking here, will not compensate for the information loss. It's about net gain versus net loss. Gene duplications are almost universally deleterious, and a few rare beneficial duplications cannot offset the many accumulating deleterious duplications, let alone all the other accumulating mutations. Evolution rescue devices, synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, not biologically real, and simulations have disproven these rescue devices. Now, evidence for genomic degradation is everywhere. Lenski, he's revealing reductive evolution. His own data still reveals clear evidence of genetic degeneration. Homo naledi, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, hobbits, all reductive evolution. Mammoth populations were highly inbred. There's a pandemic, entropic degeneration on all levels, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, and so on. H1N1 went from a red hot pandemic to a whimper to an extinction event in 90 years. Linear accumulation of mutations is what caused this extinction. Super beneficial mutation to the rescue. Super beneficial mutations will not balance out the thousands of deleterious mutations. There's Haldane dilemma. Genomic data tells us that the human genome is profoundly different than apes. So when you actually calculate what would be needed for this type of evolution, it's impossible based on calculations. Genetics confirms biblical creation. We look at the three major haplogroups, all pointing us to Noah's three daughters-in-law. Created heterozygosity hypothesis. Was that it?
10 seconds left.
Created a heterozygosity hypothesis gives us enough genetic variation and biodiversity that we need to explain all the life that we see on this planet. So that would be my presentation of the biblical model. And I think genetic degeneration is irrefutable. Thanks so much, James.
You are very welcome. Glad to have you as always. And so thank you for that opening statement. And now we are going to shift it to Adam, who's his first time here. And as mentioned, the debaters' links will be in the description so you can check them out. Highly encourage it. They've both been pleasant gentlemen, blokes, as Adam would say, maybe. So as I'm setting the timer, resetting it for Adam, just want to say if you enjoy debates, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more to come. And Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have had basically no time to prepare an actual 10-minute thing, so I'm going to improv. I've worked in a DNA laboratory quite a few years ago now, but I was studying cobra DNA. I was extracting cobra DNA from scales, blood samples, and it was to see the relationships between cobras from Asia and Africa. Now, I put them through all the tests, all the usual stuff. It took a hell of a long time because DNA extraction is an arduous process. But what I got out of it was a branching tree that showed all the different relatedness and the certainty of those how related they are in those final graphs. Took about 6 months to produce, so it is a long process. But that branch, or that series of branches showing these connectedness, is what we do for a huge portion of life. And that is one of the main reasons we let me try again. That is one of the evidences we have is the genetics, the makeup, the relatedness in terms of genetics. But not only is that good enough on its own, but it aligns up perfectly with morphology, archaeology, ecology, and basically everything. Every aspect of the biological sciences and even the chemical sciences line up with the things that we find in the DNA laboratories, things that I found in the DNA laboratories. I work a lot with reptiles, so if I come up with examples, most of the times it will be reptiles. Now we look at snakes, for example. Legless lizards is what they are. They belong to the larger lizard group, larger reptile group, even though you could argue that reptilia isn't a taxonomic group. That's something for another discussion. But if you look at ancient snakes, they had legs. And some snakes to this day, such as the boas and the pythons, still have things called pelvic spurs, which are tiny little claws just either side of the cloaca that have a very limited, if any, function at all. If you look at modern day skinks, they're going through the same process that the original snakes did all those millions of years ago, which they became burrowing animals. So they start to use their snout more to burrow under the ground. And if you see a blue-tongued skink, which is an Australian species, burrowing, it will tend to stop using its arms and legs, or just legs. It will put them to the side. And those legs have gradually shrunk over time. There are even skink species today that have just stumps where legs should be, completely useless, because they've adapted to this burrowing lifestyle. And we see this in all sorts of different species all over the planet, species, genera. And you could turn around and say, well, it's losing something. But put it this way. What do we have that the original cells not have? We're made up of chemistry, certain elements of chemistry, the same elements that would have been present in those first cells. There's nothing new about us chemically. Compare us to a fish. We have a head, we have bones, we have appendages. Look forward to something like Tiktaalik, which is one of my favorite examples. It has wrist bones. It has the bones that could allow it to move its head independent of its body. There is very little that you could say is different between us and them, apart from a massive shift in morphology, obviously. A few chemical changes here and there, hormonal changes, structures of bones. But it's all possible. There's not that much different. Creationists will always say, well, you need new information, you need these new structures. Not necessarily. The chemicals and the majority of the structures are already there from very, very early on. Speaking of Tiktaalik, I think one of the best examples of why evolution is the correct way to look at life is transitional forms. Tiktaalik being a good example of between fish and amphibians. It is a fish with traits of amphibians, but then again, we're also fish. We're Sarcopterygian fish. We're defined as that. So, I think I want to argue that Tiktaalik is just a fish. Well, yeah, so are we. And look at us, we're completely different. One of my favorite examples also is Morganucodon, which is a type of early mammal. If you look at the skulls of mammals and reptiles, they're different. The jaws, particularly. A reptile's jaw is formed up of several bones, but the mammal jaw is made up of just one. If you feel your jaw, that's just one bone there, but if you look at reptiles, multiple. Morganucodon, as well as several other transitions, are interesting because you see the movement of those bones. If you took a reptile skull and a mammal skull and put Morganucodon in the middle, you'd see three bones have shifted backwards almost to the ear, but they're still attached to the jaw. These are the stapes, malleus, incus. And you see a lot of these other transitionals where these bones are slowly shifting back through the skull until it becomes a truly mammal skull. So this is a mammal with a reptilian skull. Again, if you want to use reptilian as a taxonomic rank, which personally I don't believe it is, unless you count birds. Marsupials, I think, is a good example of evidence for evolution. The marsupials today are restricted to Australia, perhaps New Zealand, if I recall correctly. but they're not really found anywhere else in modern times across the globe. But if you look into the fossil record, if you look at the fossils and how they've been dated, you can actually see the migration of marsupials from Northern America down through South America, over Antarctica, into Australia. Back when the planet was, the tectonic plates were a completely different shift and you had different continents, these marsupials over time have moved down from North America through South America, over Antarctica and into Australia. And that's all corroborated by the dating that we used. So you see that as time has gone on, they've moved south, 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 east, 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 bang, Australia. And these are just a couple of examples that I can think of off the top of my head for good evidences for evolution. I'll address the genetic entropy stuff later, but I'm happy to concede the rest of my time here so we can move it along. Thank you.
You bet. So thank you. We really appreciate it, Adam, for that excellent opening statement. Very articulate for both of you. So now we will go into the next section, which is 10-minute rebuttals. So setting the clock. And one thing I'll let you know, Alexandra taught us this. It was a great idea. Sorry, standing for truth, I cut in on you to say you had 3.5 minutes left. What I'll do in the future is I'm just going to, if you watch my picture, like my camera view, I will just let you know by the number of fingers that I hold up how many minutes you have left. Does that sound better?
Oh yeah, that works.
Okay, great. That way, no interruptions, and credit to Alexandra for her idea. And I am starting the rebuttal clock. So the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much there, Adam. You brought up some good points. This should be fun. I've got it all written down here. I'll start with Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik can't be, the transitional form between fish and amphibians because footprints of amphibians were found older than Tiktaalik. This is what the evolutionists are now saying about this apparent blunder. They're saying that we thought we've pinned down the origin of limbed tetrapods. We have to rethink the whole thing. That's surprising, but that's what the evidence tells us. He talked a lot about DNA chemistry. The thing is, we've moved beyond that, just like I said in my opening about the four-dimensional genome. It goes beyond chemistry. And it's pushing us to really conclude design. Like, for example, alternate splicing, for example, where individual exons perform different tasks to produce different proteins. We got protein moonlighting, like a multifunctional tool. The genome functions much like a computer. In regards to the relatedness he talked about, the initial prediction, though, of the evolutionary community before the Human Genome Project was that 80% of the DNA among all life should be conserved because of the millions of years. But instead, what we do find is that 50% is conserved. So massive failed prediction, which forced evolutionists to develop this rescuing device, which is kind of like with the convergent evolution and a lot of the other rescue devices that they have developed in light of the new evidence. I mean, genetics, you can talk about genetics all day, but it's more and more confirming biblical creation. What we do know now in regards to, say, human chimpanzee genetic identity, which they used to say was 98 to 99% similar. The actual genetic identity now is only 88% similar, and that's 400 million DNA differences that exist between the two species. Another big one is human chromosome number 2, which they say arose through a fusion of two ape-like chromosomes. Now this purported fusion site is actually a functional DNA element in a human gene. They'll say humans and chimpanzees share genetic mistakes, aka pseudogenes, but now we know pseudogenes appear to be functional DNA elements, not mistakes. So genetics, if you want to talk the DNA language, the DNA chemistry, it's actually pointing to a biblical-based model. Also in regards to, say, the nests and hierarchies that he talked about in the tree of life, the thing is, creationists too predict a nested hierarchy because it doesn't take much reflection to actually see that the young earth creation and evolution model make the same prediction. Because under the young earth creation model, God designed the entire universe. including the various kinds of biological life that exist in it. So obviously we'd expect to find that life fits a design pattern. And we know from the scriptures that we're made in God's image. So we can get a sense for what kinds of design patterns God might have used by examining the patterns that result from human design. So examples of these nested hierarchies abound among the design things in our world. That means that nested hierarchical patterns are as much the expectation of the young earth creation view as they are of the evolutionary view. So it's a competing explanation. Bones found in the dirt are not inherited, traits are. So when we look at this genetic damage based on this accumulation of near neutral mutations and the fact that there's no explanation for this net loss versus net gain, the fact is whatever is being looked at in the geological record and the fossil record, it's based on a false assumption that molecules to man evolution is true, but based on what we know about genetics, it can't be true. And the ENCODE project itself shows that most nucleotides play a role in multiple overlapping codes. So if we're looking at beneficial mutations and we're comparing and looking at the net loss versus net gain, these beneficial mutations that are not deleterious would be vanishingly rare. And if you actually look at natural selection and beneficial mutations, we know that selection will remove the worst deleterious mutations and amplify the best beneficial mutations, but the accumulating damage is largely invisible, like rust on a car, like I said. So adaptations, they'll be highly visible. But Adam here, he's going to have to present us with, some examples of adaptation via, say, beneficial point mutation, duplication, whatever it is, or else he would fail to address the key issue, net gain versus net loss. So you can appeal to the fossil record, you can appeal to, these apparent transitional forms, but at the end of the day, if genetics points to a biblical model, then like I said before, it's just based on a false assumption. And if we looking here, if we look at even today, if we seen that finches, say, became extinct, and then some future paleontologists come across an island with fossil finches of, say, various beaks, and he has a pet theory that, say, early finches had short, stout beaks and gradually evolved to birds with long, thin beaks, he could then collect fossils that showed the early beaks and some with the later beaks, as well as fossils in between. So with that same logic as Darwinists have used on the fish to amphibian or reptile to mammal, as he talks about, or dino to bird even, with that same logic, he could actually make a case for his pet theory. But of course, he would be wrong in concluding that the long, thin beaks evolved in this hypothetical situation. So if we're looking at genetics, we need to see what the evidence actually points to. And the fact that our genome based on ENCODE is actually pointing to a genome that is fully functional. A lot of the evolutionists are actually against the evidence that ENCODE has discovered because it contradicts their theory. And if a lot of what we're seeing here in the fossil record is being falsely interpreted, that means that this theory of molecules to man evolution can't be true, because the fossils are just circumstantial evidence requiring a theory that can actually account for how common descent could have occurred. So that means such a theory, as I've said in my opening, it must account for how the information in living organisms could have been built up in the process of common descent. Now, since the neo-Darwinian theory, nor any other theory presently known, is able to do this, we have to conclude that fossil evidence does not support universal common ancestry. Genetic entropy, deleterious mutation accumulation, among many more genetic reasons, make the fossil record nothing more than a circular argument. How much more time do I have, James? How much more, brother? Oh.
2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Also, many of the alleged transitional forms that he talks about do not have structures in transition from one form to another. Rather, the alleged transitional nature is a combination of fully formed structures that in themselves are not actually transitional. So Darwinian evolution would have to predict, it seems, a pattern where, let's use whale intermediates, for example, they'd have to appear progressively with sufficient time between them for new complex adaptations related to, say, an aquatic lifestyle to evolve. But this pattern is not what we actually see. We don't find the pattern that evolution predicts should actually be found in the fossil records, say, at certain times, but rather we find that truly aquatic whales, since we're using that as an example, appear abruptly. And even if we accept some of the fossils as intermediates between whale and land mammals, there is not enough time for the complex adaptations needed for whales' fully aquatic lifestyle to evolve. So whatever the correct explanation is, say, for the origin of a lot of these transitional looking creatures, unguided evolutionary mechanisms are not the answer, because natural selection acting upon random variation, random mutations can account for this, for all the life that we see. Also, in regards to, let me see here. You know what? I think I covered what I needed to from his thing. I can certainly end my time here. There. Thanks, James.
You got it. My pleasure. And with that, thank you very much for your rebuttal. So next we have the rebuttal, the first rebuttal, and this is from Adam, or Steam Driven. Stoked to have you give your rebuttal. So starting the clock, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Standing. I made some notes from your first bit, as well as a couple from the rebuttal you just gave me then, so I'll hope to run through all of that. The first thing I noticed, you put atheistic evolution on your first slide. There are Christians who accept evolution, so I think this a bit, I don't think you need to put atheistic in front of that, just saying. So you said we don't know how we can explain how the genome came to be. This is very much an abiogenesis thing, because abiogenesis deals with the start of life, and the genome is essentially your sequence that replicates itself. So RNA or DNA. And it's commonly agreed now that RNA is probably where it all started off, RNA being a single strand of these nucleotides. And they have produced RNA in laboratories under certain conditions. So we know that it is possible for RNA to be created in certain environments. Usually, you've got to consider that there will be less oxygen in the initial environment, because a lot of the oxygen we have now came about when we first started to get photosynthetic organisms that produce a lot of the oxygen we have in our current atmosphere. That and a few other things, there are ways that RNA could have been created, after which you could have DNA within these phospholipid bilayers, which help protect them against water, which could damage them, and so on and so forth. I don't get too much into that. I've only got 10 minutes. Micro versus macro evolution. This is a very old one that I remember from my days of doing all this sort of stuff. So micro evolution being change within species, and macro being change outside of the species level. We do actually see speciation. Ring species is a good example. I don't think anyone's ever managed to. This is a funny thing with dogs, Great Danes and Chihuahuas. Has anyone actually gotten them to breed on their own accord? Because if not, then I'm firmly of the belief that dogs are a ring species in themselves. Because they're only really species if there isn't some obstacle in the way. And I think the size difference between those two would be a considerable obstacle. So I like to consider dogs a ring species, and hence sort of an example of macroevolution being that it sort of crosses the species boundary. But there are many examples of speciation. Microevolution and macroevolution have exactly the same processes underlying them. So there is no fundamental difference between the two. Mutations, I put on him, mutations, destruction, not construction. I think what I meant when I noted that down was that you said that mutations don't construct, they don't add to a genome, rather they destroy it. This is a common mistake. If I say there are 10 green bottles sitting on my wall, and there was a mutation to one of them, and suddenly it was a blue bottle, then that's changed things entirely. I've not got 10 green bottles in my sentence. I've got 9 green bottles and 1 blue bottle are sitting on the wall. I've increased the information content there. There's more to it. What then if we have a duplication of the entire sequence of bottles after that? So I'll have the entire lot copied. I'll have 18 green bottles and 2 blue bottles sitting on the wall. And then after that, I could have 18 green bottles, no, 17 green bottles, 1 red bottle, and 2 blue bottles sitting on the wall. These are all things that we've observed in genetics, where you've got polyploidy, which is where chromosomes or gene sequences or entire genomes are duplicated and are then free to change. So when people say, oh, there's no method for increasing information, I'd say that 17 green bottles, 1 red bottle, and 2 blue bottles is more information than 10 green bottles. And I hope you'd agree with that. Genetic entropy is an idea come up with, thought by, I think his name was John Stanford, a creationist or an intelligent design advocate. I forget which one, but they're practically the same, I think. It's never been formally published. It's only been published in creationist documents, as far as I can remember. And there's 2 problems with genetic entropy from what I know. It talks about how beneficial mutations can't keep up with deleterious mutations. But if you look at the process of how evolution works, that doesn't matter. If there are deleterious mutations in there that are so detrimental, then they'll be wiped out of the genome eventually. They'll be gone. If they're that bad, they'll disappear. Whereas the beneficial ones will maintain within the species or the genome, the gene pool. One other thing as well, they always use humans in genetic entropy, which is not by mistake. If you look around you in the world today, we've gotten to a point where natural selection, 4 minutes left, thank you. We've gotten to a point where we've sort of gone past natural selection. We have ways of saving people who in the wild or back 1,000 years ago wouldn't have a chance of survival. People with certain diseases, say Down syndromes or anything like that. We keep them alive, and a lot of them manage to reproduce. Now, they have genes that are not right, genes that have been badly mutated in some way, which has caused them to have this issue. What does that do to the average of the human genome? It will bring it down. That's why you get the declining lifespans. That's why you get the average fitness of the human race going down, because we keep the people alive, which is wholly a good thing. I don't disagree with it at all, but it does give you that false impression that somehow the human species is devolving. No, it's because our average is going down because more of us are surviving. That's how maths works. That's how you'd expect it to work. You said that Tiktaalik can't be transitional. This was in your rebuttal. You said Tiktaalik can't be transitional because amphibious footprints were found before it. That doesn't negate the fact that it's a transitional form. It's still something that is a fish but has amphibious traits. Surely it doesn't matter whether there's I haven't even heard of these amphibious footprints before, so I'm just going on what you're saying. It doesn't matter. It's still an example of something that's a fish, something that's clearly a fish and does fishy things like fish do, but it has a neck and wrist bones. It's a transitional form. You didn't address Morganucodon as well, which is the example I pushed there. 2 minutes, thank you. Talk about you wanted me to give an example of a beneficial mutation or point mutation or what have you. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, later on. Look at the human skull compared to the skull of the other example, Tiktaalik. What do you notice is different? There are a lot of small bones in Tiktaalik's head, which means the head is more flexible. Look at our skull. It houses a big brain, and we live on land where there are a lot of hard things that can hurt us. Say, for example, in Tiktaalik, there was a point mutation, which meant that a couple of those bones in Tiktaalik's head were fused. That's going to increase the strength of the skull. It's going to decrease flexibility. So yeah, could be a problem. But as it's moving on to land, the fusing of skull bones can be extremely beneficial, because if I don't know, a coconut bonked it on the head, it's not going to feel it quite as much, hopefully. So there's an example I can just think of on the top of my head. And lastly, before I finish, small against big beaks and finches, no. Because a lot of the fossils we do this sort of stuff on are dated. And we can see that one is a lot older than the other. If we did it with finches, we'd look at them and say, well, they're all from the same time, so we can't really make any judgments on that. Whereas something like Tiktaalik, fish, to land-dwelling amphibians, they all come with times attached to them. And you see Tulepteran, Ichthyostega, Anthiostega, all these different transitions, all perfectly allotted in their time frame. And that's me done.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very clear. And with that, we will go into the cross-examination, my favorite part. So we will let Standing for Truth start with the cross-examination. So we'll keep going in the normal order. And this will be 10 minutes. So this will be for each. And I am starting the clock. Standing for Truth, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, awesome there, Adam. Thanks for your rebuttal there. I guess my first question would be, because you talked about gene duplications and beneficial mutations, and I guess how many, if we were to look at numbers, how much gene duplications and say beneficial mutations are actually needed, per year for millions of years to account for the amount, the massive amount of living organisms that we actually see today. Because obviously just, claiming gene duplications can add the necessary novel information to the genome and can be beneficial enough to outweigh the genetic damage and take your fish to fishermen. Is there a paper that would detail, retrodictions on those numbers, or is it just more so a guess? Go ahead.
Well, you could look at the changing rates of DNA, and you can look at the divergence between, say, if you want an example of fish to humans, you could get your average fish genome compared to a human genome and say that's how different it is, and this is how we often, this is the rate at which we think these mutations occur.
Well, I think, keep going. Sorry, I didn't think you were done.
No, I'm done.
I think more so what I'm referring to would be like, even if we look at, say, Haldane's dilemma, like we know that a leading population geneticist, realize that even if there was an abundant and ongoing supply of, say, these beneficial mutations, natural selection must be very limited in its ability to amplify, right, such mutations to the point where they're actually fixed within a sizable population. So if you're going to, say, use gene duplication as your main mechanism for this large scale innovation, are there numbers, are there predictions, are there retrodictions, or is it just more of like a hypothetical or like an educated guess? Go ahead.
I think what you're asking me is, do the beneficial mutations account for us being here, despite? I'm not too sure, really.
Well, because if we look at genomic data, I'll try and make it a little more clear, right? Genomic data tells us that, well, we obviously know that the human genome is profoundly different than apes. So based on, let's say Haldane's dilemma, for example, there would need to be tens or even hundreds of millions of beneficial mutations that arose and then went to fixation during this time frame, right? So that scenario would require roughly, say, 1,000 independent beneficial fixations per generation. So according even to Haldane, that was almost an impossibility. So how is that resolved? Like, is there numbers? Is there any retrodictions? Because I guess that's what would make it scientific, right? Testable, falsifiable. Oh, can you hear me, Adam?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Like, do you find that Haldane's dilemma, for example, the problem of beneficial mutation fixation, I mean, is that resolved with actual scientific data, scientific papers, or in what you're saying in regards to, say, gene duplications, beneficial mutations, are there specific numbers? Are there papers out there that would break that down for us?
I imagine there could be. I invite you to go look for them.
Okay. If in regards to like building the genome, building that information that you're talking about earlier, I wasn't specifically referring to abiogenesis, but I did catch a few things on what you were saying in regards to DNA origins. From what I understand, evolution itself never actually predicted the RNA, DNA, protein system, and I think you said RNA evolved first, correct?
That's the common consensus, that RNA came before DNA. Yeah.
So it sounded like you used a lot of magical words like, probably, say, when explaining the RNA origins. And then obviously if we're talking about testable, falsifiable science, that doesn't seem like it'd be science. Like, are there testable predictions and retrodictions on DNA origins? Selection pressure, for example. Are there actual numbers, or is this RNA, DNA, protein system, the evolution of DNA origins, is this also more so like an educated guess?
The reason I spoke about it is because you brought it up in your rebuttal, so I felt the need to reply to it because you asked for it specifically. Aside from that, abiogenesis isn't my area, so my knowledge is to the best of it, and we're still not too certain on abiogenesis. So that's why I'm using deliberately vague language rather than saying this is fact.
And that's understandable too. I appreciated your responses there. Let's say with DNA redundancy, right? How did because we die without DNA redundancy. We know it's really important. How did evolution, know we die without DNA redundancy? Since evolution, natural selection looks at the short term, how did that evolve? What was the foresight in something like that?
I'm not too certain on that. What, DNA redundancy?
Yeah, just all the redundancy that we actually see in the genome. I mean, would you agree? Would you agree with the statement that overall now, based on new evidence, that the non-coding regions of DNA function, say, much like an operating system in a computer, right? It's directing timing, expression, regulation, and use of the other information or the data files that actually code for the protein. So, like, how, with natural selection's limited foresight, how did this computer-like code evolve? And how is that scientific? Like, if you go back to testable and falsifiable predictions, I mean, do you have any answers to that at all?
DNA is pure chemistry. Everything about DNA works within the bounds of chemical laws and everything we know about chemistry. So there's nothing about DNA that we wouldn't expect. Going back, it's all about the origins of DNA, because everything else is explained purely by the concept of chemical laws. So unless you're asking for the origins of it, I don't know what the problem is.
I would just say the building of a genome, say, from the single-celled organism. And I guess if you're talking about DNA chemistry, if we look at something like alternate splicing, which I think clearly shows design way beyond what evolution could do, how did each exon learn how to manufacture different proteins? Also, why are there bits of sequences teaching and regulating the exon? So it just seems like it's so much more than just chemistry. And I guess I'm just using the example of alternate splicing for now. Go ahead.
DNA is like an old football. It's a bit of a mess, really. There's scratches on it, scrapes. Bit of the fabric has worn off and disappeared. There's bits of grass stuck in it. DNA is a mess, and the only reason that can really be explained is by looking through the DNA of a whole host of different organisms and seeing how they compare, which bits are the same, which bits have changed, and comparing that to morphology, to the animals we have, how we see things today. That I don't understand what is you're asking really, apart from that. How it's formed, how all these things came together. You're asking a very vague question of, I don't understand how this works. Tell me how.
I think I'm just saying that based on and in light of all the evidence about DNA function, it seems like we're dealing at this point with a highly compressed DNA code beyond the best computer code. We know we write books. We don't write books that can be read both forwards and backwards. So if, say, natural selection mutations had to build this genome, and I'm not specifically talking about abiogenesis, of course, but if evolution is true, given the millions or billions of years of evolution, I don't see how evolution could build such a highly compressed DNA code is what I'm saying. Like, do you find it more plausible to say there was no designer? I guess would be the best question in regards to that.
Put it this way. As I mentioned, there is nothing in DNA that doesn't follow the laws of chemistry. Therefore, we've got no reason to suppose it was something supernatural that doesn't follow the laws of chemistry that could have brought it about. We have to assume that because it all follows laws of chemistry, that it all follows laws of chemistry. And that's how it formed. We can't just say, oh, this is too complicated, therefore God did it. We can't do that. It's just not feasible.
But if DNA is a mess, as you say, how then does it produce, just say us, for example, so well? Like, for example, Hox genes?
Because when it doesn't produce as well, those organisms die.
Time. Sorry, I gave you a message in the internal Google chats, and then I also tried to hold up my finger. I hate to cut you off, standing for truth, but
That's okay. That's okay. Sorry, but we could probably go on with that forever. That was fun.
No problem. So, thanks for your patience. And then we will give Adam, or Steam Driven, his 10 minutes to cross-examine Standing for Truth and resetting the clock. The floor is yours.
Okay. Good starting point. Can you give me the different process in macro to micro evolution? What process is different?
So I would say if we're looking at micro and macro evolution, I don't personally like to use those words, because even in regards to our model of, say, created heterozygosity, right? God created, let's just use Adam and Eve, for example, with pre-existing DNA differences. So through processes like recombination, gene conversion, I mean, that would provide many new varieties quickly, since those differences are already built in. So I mean, certainly in regards to the biblical based model, I mean, we're going to predict change. Okay, and evolution means change over time, change in allele frequency in populations over time or generations. I think it just comes down to whether or not there's a limit to that change. So it's hard to say exactly what the difference between micro and macro is, because like I said in the opening, like that type of micro evolutionary variation where you get a change in the frequency of the expression of different traits, I'm not disputing that, right? Because that does explain the survival of the fittest, but just not the arrival of the fittest. So I think it comes down to whether or not there's limits and how far you can take that change. Are dogs and bananas related or through common ancestry? I mean, I think there'd be a limit there.
Okay. So would you consider speciation to be part of micro or macro evolution?
I would say according to the biblical based model, speciation, say from shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity, because that's how we would explain the rapid speciation since creation and since the flood. So speciation is important, and there's been documented cases recently. Actually, Dr. Nathaniel Jensen wrote a paper on it, where in real time, finches, it was observed that there were shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity due to inbreeding, leading to a new species of finches. So that's actually what we would predict based on pre-existing heterozygosity, created heterozygosity, I should say. I'm not against that. And I wouldn't say that that's macroevolution, because I mean, there's still finches, there's still birds, but the change we've seen in that allele frequency in those populations of finches is expected and predicted under our model. So I think I wouldn't say that that's macro though.
Okay, next question. If we go back to my bottles on the wall example, would you consider that an increase in information?
Can you, I'm looking at my notes here. I have a lot of notes on everything you said.
Okay, yeah. I basically said you have 10 green bottles to start with. Then there's a mutation where one of those bottles becomes blue. Then you have another mutation where the entire sequence is copied. So you've got 18 green and 2 blue. And then there's another mutation where there's 1 red, 2 blue, and 17 greens. Is that an increase in information?
Well, it sounds like it's because what I was saying, you know, shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity was leading to speciation, say in a real-time example of these finches. So in your example with the bottles, I can't see what's going on a genomic level, on a DNA level, to see if it is a loss of information. Because if a lot of the examples I see of, say, speciation beneficial mutations, if it is decay of prior information, I don't believe that's going to take your fish to fishermen. So it's hard to say. I get your analogy with the bottles, but if you can reiterate the question a little bit differently, I mean, how can I conclude if it is an increase in information?
The analogy takes single point mutations, so the green bottle will change to blue, and polyploidy, which is the entire set duplicating, which we do witness. And it was just an analogy to say replace, I don't know, chromosomes with the bottles, and those are things we do see, we have seen. So I'm just asking whether that's an increase in information.
I would say that it's, let's say gene duplications, for example. You know, I think, and we might be able to agree to this, Adam, I think gene duplications are almost universally deleterious. So say a few rare beneficial duplications, I don't see how those are going to be able to offset the many accumulating deleterious duplications, let alone all the other accumulating mutations. And with your bottle colors, you know, those color changes in regards to our model, those are pre-programmed in our DNA. So that information is already present. You know, there's no new novel and meaningful information added. And probably, like all examples of beneficial mutations, it probably is decay of prior information. Does that help answer your question?
I mean, I would disagree on it, but I'd like to ask another question.
Of course.
About 4 minutes left, and it's nice to have these little discussions, and they could lead on from there. But my next one was, how do you explain the gradual movement of marsupials from North America through South America, over Antarctica, and into Australia?
Okay, so actually, can you repeat that? So the gradual geographical distribution of marsupials?
We find fossil marsupials ranging from North America through South America, over Antarctica, and into Australia. And the way we date them shows that it happened over time. So it lines up perfectly, moving from North America through to Australia. Can you explain that?
Of course. Like I would say, obviously, if we're looking at, so you mentioned the fossil distribution of these marsupials. I mean, short answer would be, you know, post-flood ice age, post-flood environmental conditions, because, you know, we look to the flood to explain the fossil record. So if we actually look at the upper layers, because you're talking about the upper layers where we're observing these marsupial distributions, correct? The fossils?
They do come from different layers.
Okay, so I would say that the layers that we see them in, based on our model of post-flood ice age, you know, we see in those layers post-flood diversification and dispersion, and I think it's readily explainable through. I'm not sure if you've read much, you know, creation literature, technical papers, but we say that it's explainable through land bridges, floating mats during the ice ages, right? And we can see that animals can be distributed around in very natural means, even in real time, say during cataclysmic events. So given a flood model and flood geology, you know, I don't see a problem in that geographical distribution. Go ahead.
So you say that marsupials went from the Middle East, they traveled to North America, then down through South America, then over Antarctica, and then to Australia within, well, because we know that no records of marsupials being in North America or Antarctica have been found by humans in recent times at all. So say, give it 1,000 years max. Is that possible?
So 1,000 years since the actual post-flood ice
since
age.
the flood.
And you're trying to think, and you're saying that the distribution of these marsupials is
It's linear.
conflicting to, yeah, and based on the remodeling of, say, the Earth post-flood. Well, for one, I know you mentioned, dating methods. I mean, I'm sure that that could go on a rabbit trail, so we won't go on that. But I would say that there's a lot of assumptions and guesses in there. So I mean, for me, I disagree that would be reliable. But yeah, ice age producing land bridges to cross and the distribution that you see. But the thing is, these animals, thousands of years ago, based on our model of pre-existing heterozygosity, I mean, the variation, the biodiversity, I think would be even in excess as compared to what we see now. So yeah, are you saying that there's a lot of variety in these marsupials in these geographical related areas?
Yeah, they're not the same as today's marsupials.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect them either, because shifts from hetero to homozygosity for us in explaining speciation, I mean, post-flood land bridges, post-flood environmental conditions, because you can't look at the Earth now and assume that that's exactly the way it was before. So I think that is a plausible explanation for the geographical distribution of not only marsupials, but all other life and diversity that we see as well.
Okay, one more question to finish us off.
Yeah, of course.
What's the point of a skink with stumps? I mentioned earlier a skink that has merely a couple of stumps near the front of its body that have no purpose whatsoever. What's the point of it?
I'm sorry. So it's a couple of stumps in front of its body that has no purpose?
Stumps. They've lost the claws. There's just a stump on either side.
Well, I know you mentioned, because I would say a loss of information. The evolutionists will use a lot of examples of losses of information as if, hey, lose everything and we'll gain it all. But in regards to that exact reason as to, I mean, if it's a specific mutation that made them lose the information, and it's a deformity, is what you're saying, correct?
It's a mutation. It's not a deformity. No, it's an actual species of skink. I forget its exact name, but it's a species that has stumps. I mean,
maybe we don't know the purpose yet. I mean, for example, how many vestigial organs were, listed even 100 years ago? I think there was 140. Now they're all known to have a function. Now we're seeing this in the DNA language as well. So do we know, and do we have conclusive evidence that it has no purpose?
Time.
They're pretty useless. We'll finish there.
Excellent. So thank you both very much. And now we'll move into the quick closing. So this is just 5 minutes each. And to keep it moving, we will jump right into it. So Standing for Truth, if you have your materials ready, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. I think this has been fun. I really enjoyed the cross-examination. I didn't really see any real solid rebuttal to say genome degradation. I think that's important to explain the net loss versus the net gain, because if on a genetic level, for example, Darwin, he didn't know anything about genetics. The laws of inheritance certainly came from Mendel and his pea plant experiments. Look into that. That certainly explains and reveals the evidence for our created heterozygosity model. But if there's no explanation for the genome degradation, obviously pawns come to people evolution can't be true. So even phylogenetic systematics, it's based on a primary assumption that this universal common ancestry did happen, when we know based on genetics that it couldn't have happened. Now that means a biblical based model based on the fact that genome degradation, mutation accumulation after the fall is consistent. The evidence, the empirical data is better explained through our model. And even if we look at examples of beneficial mutations, I know he gave an example of a skull, but I think even his example of the bottles there, for example, we have pre-programmed a lot of these changes. They're non-random epigenetic changes based on the pre-existing information. So that can't be used as sufficient examples for pawns come to people evolution. And even if you look at the praised examples of beneficial mutations, whether it's African resistance to malaria, we know that's due to a broken hemoglobin protein. Melano mutation is praised as a human mutation, but we know that's a loss in net specificity. Nylon digestion by bacteria, also a loss of substrate specificity. And at the end of the day, if you're using examples of, say, adaptive immunity, homologous recombination, antibiotic resistance, and bacterial sickle cell anemia, as I said, these all fail to meet the requirements of a gain in information. And if you're duplicating an already degenerate gene, that's just going to speed up the degeneration process. And I didn't see him, address the evidence that I provided for genomic degeneration. I mean, we see it in real time. I know Richard Dawkins praises the E. coli experiment as a strong evidence for evolution. I mean, we know Lenski demonstrated, and he is demonstrating reductive evolution. All beneficial mutations seen in this experiment, the reductive loss of function, loss of promoter, loss of genes. They're painting themselves into a corner. They're handicapped, they're lazy, they're weak. They're getting rid of genes short term, but what it is it's long-term degeneration. So at the end of the day, the adaptation in this experiment, and this is a perfect experiment to look at to see whose model is stronger, it's largely accomplished by means of loss of function and loss of regulation mutation. So that's a net loss of information. That's not going to take your fish to fisherman. We see paleogenomic evidence. I mean, mammoth populations, we see that they carried an elevated genetic load. Neanderthal was highly inbred and had very high genetic load. There's a pandemic of mutation-related diseases in the human population: Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, asthma, autoimmune cancers, immunological. This is entropic degeneration on all levels. Without an explanation on how to solve this, you're not going to get your fish to fisherman evolution, and that means it's just a false assumption based on really a lack of evidence. And even the H1N1 human version, people will say that John Sanford misrepresented the data, but evolutionists themselves cannot explain why the H1N1 virus is extinct in humans. Right? Adaptive evolution does not cause extinctions. And the virus started off more human in its codon usage and ended up randomized. It became worse at interacting with human DNA over time. So if it is using the wrong codons, that means it will be less efficient at replicating in human hosts. So this is a decline in functionality and matches exactly with genetic entropy. So the amount of evidence for genome-wide degradation for John Sanford's model is actually overwhelming. And more importantly, genetics confirms biblical creation. If you look at the three major haplogroups, the length of the lines on the distribution of these mitochondrial DNA variants really does show there's three independent lines of evidence that fit exactly what we see in mitochondrial DNA. That's exactly what we'd expect through biblical creation. The history of humanity is in our genome. So what we know about mitochondrial DNA of humans fits the 6,000-year timescale, explains the three major haplogroups and the relative differences between pre and post-flood humanity. So I see a ton of evidence for biblical creation. The evidence that I see for biblical creation contradicts evolutionary theory. So at the end of the day, I think that's all I have to say. I think the model's strong, and I think the model for large-scale evolution is quite weak in light of the genetic data that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that closing statement and resetting the clock. We'll try to keep moving fast. As one of the debaters we found out has to get up super early, we're going to try to move through this as fast as possible, and then we're going to try to do some questions and answers. It's going to be really short, though, to be honest. So we're going to try to get through as many questions as we can. Thanks for your patience on that. And the floor is yours, Adam. Thanks so much. Steam driven. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got to be up for work in 4 hours, so I won't be around too much longer. Evolution is chemistry. I mean, people will say it's biology, but everything about evolution is based entirely in chemistry. The interactions between various molecules in the DNA and outside of the DNA in the cells that make us, everything follows those laws of chemistry. And nobody's ever come up to me with an example of a mystery that chemistry cannot solve when it comes to evolution. We are answering the questions such as abiogenesis. That's the next big stepping point for us, I think, even though it's not technically part of evolution. I think it's going to be a big reveal when we finally get to it, when we finally say, this is how it's likely to have happened. And it will be chemistry that answers that question. Nothing that was said today has been much of a problem for me. There are things obviously I don't know, but I know that I can go look up. Evolution is an incredibly large subject, incredibly large, and you'd be extremely naive to think that anybody would know every single part of it. But the people who doubt evolution, I suggest go listen to this debate and hear the points, and go look up the papers on it. Go look up John Sanford's paper. It's not an actual paper, as I've mentioned. Genetic entropy has never really been formally put forward, but go read it anyway. See what you think, and then look at what the scientists say. Apart from that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Totally appreciate it. Steam driven. So, as mentioned, both the debaters' links are in the description, even if you don't agree with them. Let's say you're like, man, I can't stand the other side. Well, this is a great chance to at least understand their perspective by going to read their own sources. And you can say truly stepping in their shoes as much as possible to get their point of view. So with that, we will start going into the question and answers, and we'll try to get through as many as possible while trying to respect our debaters' time. So if that's okay with the debaters, if we just go through like a short little bit, is that all right?
Yeah, we could just do a few questions. I understand he has to be up early, and we've gone for quite a while. So yeah, whatever works best, brother.
I'm perfectly fine with it.
Okay. So we actually have a number of them. So Landon Freeman actually posted this before the debate started. So it is relevant though, and so I'll ask it because it's like pertinent to the material. But Landon Freeman, thanks for being proactive, checking out the cards, the event cards. So what evidence, he asked, this is for Steam Driven, he said, what evidence would cause you to doubt the naturalistic view of evolution and universal common ancestry?
It's quite a difficult question because there's so many areas that I could come up with. I could use the same example that Bill and I used. I think it was Bill and I, or it might have been Richard Dawkins, of finding a fossil rabbit in the Cambrian. We could find that, well, yeah, essentially anything like that. Find any animal, any fossil that does not fit with what we have. Because everything we have found does fit. That's basically it. If something doesn't fit, it don't fit.
Gotcha. You bet. Well, thank you for that. And HistoryNet is asking, this is one for Standing for Truth, coming after you. This is an in-house objection, you might say. And HistoryNet also asked me, he asked, why haven't you had any Christians who believe in evolution come on to debate? And we're trying to do that. I'm actually reaching out to a scholar right now, not literally right now, in this 24-hour period, to ask if they'd be willing to come on and debate. So it'd be Christian versus maybe be an atheist, maybe be another Christian. So just so you know that, HistoryNet, thanks for that question. Now HistoryNet has a question for you, Standing for Truth, which is, why do you persist with denying evolution when most believers accept it?
Well, I think I'm not sure if most believers do accept it, because the believers that I've known, especially on a personal level, and in the church I go to, I mean, nobody accepts Ponce coming to people evolution. There's absolutely no evidence for it. I mean, I've debated plenty of scientists. Jackson Weed had a month to prepare. R.J. Downer, all great debates, great guys, great discussions. But literally, I mean, I've read all the rebuttals for genetic entropy, and 90% of the stronger rebuttals say, mutation count, mechanism, synergistic epistasis. A lot of the examples that you think someone who's well-read and prepared for a debate would actually use haven't even been used. And all they speak of is the obvious, right? Natural selection happens, adaptation happens, beneficial mutations happens. We're not arguing that. because the genomic degradation problem, genetic entropy, happens after the fact. So if I'm looking at the empirical data and see clearly that pawns come to people evolution can't be true, and the evolutionists that I assume are strong apologetics and the evolutionary heavyweights of YouTube also don't have a rebuttal to it and aren't even using the recommended rebuttals, why would I reject a perfectly good Bible? That's what I don't understand about theistic evolutionists is they reject a perfectly good Bible, reject what Genesis clearly teaches about man being created in the image of God, but yet they want to believe that man and apes are related through common ancestry over a dumb theory that has absolutely no evidence for it. So I reject it based on the fact that, for one, the Bible doesn't teach monkey to man evolution, and the empirical scientific data refutes bacteria to biologist evolution. So that's why I reject it.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for your question, HistoryNet. We appreciate it. And so we're just going to ask one more, and then let's see. Just to respect the debaters' time, the debaters are really the ones who get in the hot seat and do so much work. And so I want to say thanks to both the debaters, and I also want to say especially thanks for Adam, for you're already kind of staying past time, and so totally appreciate that. And this is just the last question. So Pine Creek asks, if standing for truth were not a Christian, does he think he'd be more likely to accept evolution via common descent?
That's actually a really good question. I know there are a lot of Christians who don't accept universal common ancestry based on the empirical data. I mean, a lot of advocates and proponents of intelligent design aren't necessarily Christians. And when I started looking at the evidence, I didn't consider myself a born-again Christian. I had not put my faith and trust in the work of Jesus Christ alone, so I wouldn't have even said I was saved. And from my research, I was already beginning to reject universal common ancestry. So obviously the Bible and Christianity does have something to do with it, but with the evidence that I've seen and the research that I've put into this, I don't see how it can be true for so many reasons. So no, I don't think, if I had the same research that I did now and I wasn't a Christian, whether I was a Muslim or a polytheist, whatever, I think I would have rejected it as well. It's a good hypothetical. That's probably the best answer I could give.
You got it. Excellent. So with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming by. Thank you for your questions, which I will save. So in other words, once we have these debaters back, hopefully in the future, maybe in a month from now for a rematch, these questions are going to be saved. So it's not like I'm erasing them. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. And we thank you for them. We thank you for the debaters so much for getting in the hot seat and the preparation you've done. Just thanks for coming on. Glad to have you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, both of you. James and Standing. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I stayed up late, but I'm happy I did. So, and I wasn't prepared, so I'm still happy I did. So,
I enjoyed the talk. I think you did great. Maybe we can do it again in the future. Prepare a little more, but yeah, James, as always, you put on a good show, brother.
Thanks. I totally appreciate it. And if this is your first time here, highly encourage you, hit that subscribe button and that little bell notification button for reminders of when we go live, as we will have debates almost every night this week. So it's going to be a pretty busy week, and we're stoked about all the different topics. So with that, I want to say thanks everybody for coming. And after show. So Standing for Truth is going to host an after show on his channel that I'll be headed over to. And then also Steve McCrae is also hosting an after show. So let's see, we will encourage you to check out both. Actually, you can have both windows open and you can kind of peek in and see what each is saying, as I'm not sure, but my guess is Steve McCrae might disagree. So Standing for Truth will probably disagree with Steve McCrae. So encourage you to check both of those out. And we hope you have a great night. Thanks for stopping by, and thanks for being so helpful to the channel. Seriously, all the time. We're kind of learning together, and I'm ultimately learning because of all of you. So thanks for your help.
We are live on Standing for Truth tonight, and we are debating creation versus evolution. I'm really excited here. The more specific topic, though, is common design versus universal common ancestry, guys. Before we get started, if everybody is enjoying these debates and discussions and just the content on this channel, please like and subscribe. That'd be awesome. So let's get to the fun. Let's get the party started. I'd like to thank both the debaters, Adam here, and Dr. Ken Hovind, for giving us their time for today's debate. We know the one thing we all could use more of is time, that's for sure. So I'm going to hand it over to Nephilim Free here. He's going to be tracking the time, and he's going to go over the format real quick and give us the rundown. Thanks, guys, and go ahead there, Neph.
Okay, so the format for this debate is 5-minute opening statements. Then each opponent will give a 4-minute rebuttal. Then there'll be a 30-minute discussion session, and then 3-minute closings and 6 to 10-minute question and answer session. So who is starting the debate? Did anybody decide, or should I flip a mental coin?
Adam.
Adam is going first. Okay,
Yes.
Adam, if you're ready, whenever you're ready, you begin speaking, and I'll start the timer. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Right, it's going to put my slideshow on full screen. Hello, everybody. Can you all see my screen, my PowerPoint? Yeah?
Yes,
Everyone
I see it.
That's fine. Okay. So, can you see it, Kent? Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Ah, lovely. Right, so my name is Adam. I own a gaming channel here on YouTube. This is not the sort of thing I usually do, but Standing for Truth sent me a message and dragged me along to this. Not kicking and screaming, thankfully. I came along willingly. I am joined here by Dwayne Johnson, Donald Trump, and Delboy, and I'm going to run through this argument with you: common design versus common designer. Kent is arguing for common designer. I'm arguing for, well, not entirely common design. We're going to get into that. So, evolution. It requires common design. It also requires uncommon design, and I'll explain that fully. So let's look at some common designs first. What do we have here? We have a human hand. So you've got your thumb, you've got your 4 fingers. That equals 5 digits on the human hand. We've got a dog's paw. We again have 5 digits. You've got the 4 toes. You also have the dew claw, which is that one slightly behind, just above the I forget the name of the bit below. My apologies. So 5 digits there again. This is a lizard, one of the reptiles, and it too has 5 digits.
I hate to interrupt, but Adam, if you think your screens are changing, they're not. I just thought I'd point that out. There might be a technical issue. Now they are, it seems like. Okay, I'll be quiet. I'm going to give you about 15 more seconds. Just wanted to let you know the screen was not changing. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so that's your dog paw there. This is your lizard. So 5 digits there. Now, next one. Now, that is a chameleon's foot. What do we notice about the chameleon's foot? It has 2 toes, and yet it has 5 claws. Now, how do we explain this looking at it from an evolutionary point of view? Well, let's look at the skeletal structure of the chameleon. You see there on each foot, it has 5 toes. 2 toes. Now, how do we explain this? The ancestors of the chameleon were, well, your more common lizards, really. It had the 5 digits like it does here. But it adapted to live as an arboreal creature. So it grabs onto twigs, onto branches. And it adapted to develop these almost pincer-like toes that don't act like your normal digits do. And yet it retains these 5. You just see there at the bottom of the pencil, it's got 2 toes on one side and 3 on the other, but they're all melded together. Not the bones, but the skin around it. And they can't really move them independently. Skinks. These are all skinks that you see on the picture here. So you've got the blue-tongued skink at the top, which has the 4 legs. And then at the bottom right-hand corner, you've got another type of skink, which is entirely legless. In the midst of these 2, you've got 3 more skinks with varying levels of legness, if you want to use that as a word. So the one in the middle has got extremely reduced limbs to the point where they almost don't exist. They hardly use them. They've got long bodies that they move like a snake, and they have these tiny little limbs that don't really do much, to be honest. And these are all skinks. They all have a very similar lifestyle. They're burrowing animals, which is why they've eventually lost these legs, because legs are more of a hindrance than anything when you're trying to dig underground. So there you have a common design. So you've got the skinks, but you've got an uncommon design. And we're going to explain that evolutionarily, if that's a word again. Right, so snakes. Boas and pythons are rather special among the snakes because they have what are called pelvic spurs. These claws that you see up here. It looks like a Burmese python on the top. It looks like another python below. And on the right-hand side, you can see the bone structure. You can see the actual pelvic bones down there. Now, the claws, they have a purpose in mating, but the bones within there don't do anything. They float freely in the muscle mass. They're just there as remnants. And this is uncommon among the snakes. It's only common between two of them. Why is it not in all of the snakes? Why is it in none of the snakes? Well, evolution can explain that. Here are some common and uncommon designs again.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Common and common at the same time. You've got very common leg structures in terms of bones, but they fulfill different functions and they are in entirely different skins, as it were. So you've got fins on the left, feet on the right-hand side. I'm going to rush through these last bits. Is that my time? I heard a bell ringing.
Yeah, 15 seconds.
I'll finish it there. I can go over the rest of this stuff later if you wish. I pass my time over.
All right, Dr. Hovind will go next. Dr. Hovind, when you begin speaking, 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, well, thank you. Good to be here. My name's Kent Hovind. I was a high school science and math teacher 15 years, moved to Pensacola, Florida in 1989 and began the Ministry of Creation Science Evangelism. I take the position that the Bible is true and scientifically accurate. The Bible 20 times in the first 7 chapters says the animals will bring forth after their kind. That's all we've ever seen. And everything Adam showed today is the same kind of animal. Might be variations within that kind, but still, he hasn't shown the evidence for evolution that I could see. So we're building a Christian camp in Lenox, Alabama, Dinosaur Adventure Land. Come on down and see us. Our website is drdino.com. Get the commercial in there. I think the evidence is overwhelming. There's a common designer. Did you know the lug nuts from a Honda Accord will fit on a Honda Prelude? You can go try it. Unscrew the lug nuts. They'll fit right on. That proves they both evolved from a skateboard 14.729 million years ago. That's the kind of fuzzy logic Adam is using. Because there are similarities between creatures, therefore they must have a common ancestor. Well, that's ludicrous. I think the reason the lug nuts on a Honda Accord will fit on a Honda Prelude is because they're both made by the same people, Honda. I think you'll find thousands of similarities between all the different types of cars. Nearly all the cars in America, the steering wheel is on the left side. And in Britain, they're on the right side. Well, what does that prove? Well, that's the way they drive over there. That's the way they design the car. So if there are similarities between the Chevy and the Ford and the Honda over here, that might prove that because they're designed to drive on the roads over here in America. So to use evidence that he's showing, pointing out similarities, 5 toes on all these creatures, well, yeah, that's the same designer designed them all. I don't think he has a clue about the chameleon and how he flexes his muscles and uses his 5 toes to feel the branch. And what if he hurts one of them? What if he only had 2 and stubbed his toe or broke it or something? Well, he could still function just fine. Redundancy. Why do most of the cars carry a spare tire? Well, in case you get a flat. This is common sense 101. So to say that because they look similar in somebody's mind, therefore they must be related is ludicrous. That wouldn't hold up 2 seconds in an honest court of law. We do see 5 claws, 5 fingers on many creatures. I'm surprised that he mentioned about the python and the pelvic leg bones. First place, Adam, going from having legs to not having legs would be losing, not gaining. All the evidence I've ever seen evolutionists give are things like this, where they think something is losing something. Why don't you see it gaining? Same thing with the Sphinx. You said burrowing in the ground, legs would be a hindrance. Okay, well, they all burrow in the ground and some have legs. Apparently they need them for something we don't know about, or maybe somebody does know about it and I just don't happen to know. So the fact that I think there's an amazing design. And to look at, 1 year Porsche built a car, accidentally built it, if my understanding is right, that you could not change the spark plugs without removing the motor from the frame. You had to take the motor out of the car to change the spark plugs. Well, that was a poor design, but it doesn't mean it wasn't designed. Okay, I don't think there's any poor design in God's nature any place, but if we don't understand why he designed something the way he did, that doesn't prove he didn't design it. I think that's a silly argument for evolution, to say this is poor design, therefore it happened by chance. I could look at the Porsche and say, look at that poor design, therefore nobody made the Porsche, which would be silly. Of course somebody made it. They made a goof. I happen to believe, and I'll tell you, I do not believe God made any goofs. I think we need to study. Back in 1905, I think was the date, they listed in the encyclopedia 180 vestigial organs that the human body has. They said, you don't need your appendix, you don't need your tonsils, you don't need your adenoids. And they went on and on and on, listing these vestigial structures. Well, the problem was not that they're vestigial. The problem was they didn't understand the function of them yet. There are none, zero, nada, no vestigial structures anywhere. And the snake does not have vestigial legs. And those bones are not floating freely in the snake's body. Those bones and those claws are used in the python for mating. Snakes can't talk. They can't say, screw it over, honey. They don't have any arms. That's how the snake, you can watch them when they mate. They'll use those claws and the bones internally to maneuver the female into position so they can mate with them. Has nothing whatsoever to do with walking on land. But again, I'd point out clearly, this, even if it was true, this is losing, not gaining. Where are the examples of any animal or plant gaining a new feature, a new structure, not a new use of an existing structure? I have used a crescent wrench a couple of times for a hammer. Okay. That's all I had available. And so sometimes animals or plants may have to use some of their existing structures for a heretofore unused job that they have to do. But that's not evolution. That's silly to call that evidence for evolution. Go ahead.
Okay, so now it's Adam's turn for a 4-minute rebuttal. Adam, when you begin speaking, 4 minutes, sir.
Oh, Adam, I think you're on mute. You got to unmute yourself, brother.
My apologies. Saying thank you, Ken. It's good to speak to you. Obviously, our first time speaking. It's a pleasure, mate. And I hope we can have some more fun as we go along in this.
Sure.
I'm going to skip this bit for now because you mentioned Hondas, didn't you? And funnily enough, here is one now. This is the devil car, the Honda Jazz. I can't stand the things. And this was obviously designed by a person. So was this Honda Jazz. Now, you'd say it was designed by the same person. It's got the same logo. It's got all the same bits. Really, we should be calling this the Honda debate, if we could please, standing for truth. We've got another Honda here. This, again, is a Honda Jazz. You could say, yeah, it's got all the hallmarks of a Honda, and you'd expect it to be made by the same person. But then what about that? Now, looking at that, and looking at those 3 Honda Jazzes there, are you going to turn around to me and say, well, they must have had the same designer because they've all got wheels? Well, clearly they weren't made by the same designer. That tank is not a Honda, especially not a Honda Jazz. I imagine it moves at more than 10 miles an hour. Let's look at nature. There's a fish. There's another fish. And there's a fish. You could say, oh, they've all got commonality, so why weren't they made by a common designer? Okay. There's your octopus. We're one of the most alien-looking things on the planet. So if you're not going to say the tank was made by the same people that made the Honda, then why would you say that all animals and plant life had a common designer when there are such different designs? Right, what else did I put? You mentioned that there are goofs in these animals. Now let me ask you this. I imagine you're talking from the point of view of God creating all these animals and such. Well, if that were the case, why would there be goofs? Why would there be animals at all? Because all throughout history, all throughout the fossil record, what do we see? We see trial and error in much the same way that cars went through trial and error. Do you think that if they made the perfect car to start with, they would need more than one? No, cars started with, I believe it was maybe the Ford. Those were one of the first types of car. But over time, we found errors with it. We found problems. And each time we've done trial and error to make the better car design. And cars have forever been adapting, getting better, because the previous ones weren't up to scratch. Some of them are, and they last a long time, like the Mini over here in Britain. It was around in the 60s. Most cars from the 60s aren't here anymore, but the Mini is still here with us because it has adapted to the British lifestyle. You mentioned snakes using the claws in mating. Well, why don't all snakes use them in mating then? Why is it not a common design? Why is it only certain snakes have it? Why is it not all of them have it, or none of them have it? Because they all mate in the same way, essentially. New features. What about spitting in cobras? Where you've got basal cobras don't have the ability to spit. This is a study that was done, and you look at ones like pseudo-Goldii, which is near the bottom there, which is one of the more basal cobras. It doesn't have the ability to spit. And neither do the ones below that, so your Walterenesia, Egyptia, your false cobra, they can't spit. And yet 3 groups have evolved this ability independently, these unique features, this ability to spit. And they don't spit the same either, they spit differently. If it was something commonly made, why wouldn't they all have the same spit? Why is it as well that, unlike vipers, cobras can't move their fangs? Both have fangs, the vipers have fangs and the cobras have fangs, but they both use them differently. One of them moves and one of them doesn't. Why are we not seeing a common design? Why are we not seeing snakes all looking like Honda Jazzes, having the same features, the same functions, the same inability to go over 20 miles an hour? Why are we not seeing that? You mentioned after kind. Well, let's go to how much time have I got left, Neff?
All right, that's time.
Oh, yeah, leave it there.
So now we're going to have a 4-minute rebuttal from Dr. Hovind. When you begin speaking, sir, 4 minutes.
Well, thank you. Very interesting bit of argument. If you think that is evidence that we all came from an amoeba, I think you're really seriously needing some help. Let me answer a few of these. You showed 3 cars and a tank. I think you will see that all of them are have the same. They're meeting a basic need of moving somebody to a new location. So they probably have a driver's seat or passenger seats, maybe even. They probably have some method of moving, like wheels. They probably have a reason for wanting to move, like to be in a different location, like the car or the tank. So it's a design feature that works. Honda could probably start building tanks if they wanted. Honda could build airplanes if they wanted. I have built cars, I have built dune buggies, I have built decks, I've built houses, I have written books. I'm only one person. I think if God can design a fish and an octopus and a whale and a cell and a plant and 1,000 varieties of apples, I think that's proof of a really intelligent God, not proof of a common ancestor, proof of a common designer. I think you've made my case for me. Thank you very much. He said, why did the designer make such incredible variety? To me, that's to prove he can do it. Why did he make some snakes to spit and some not to spit? I don't know. I haven't studied that. That'd be a question for a herpetologist. Is there a reason? But to say that some can spit and some can't, therefore, all snakes came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago is ludicrous at many levels. I'd be willing to bet $1,000 or euros or whatever you use over there that snakes, when they have babies, the babies turn out to be snakes every time. And you mentioned about the cars. It's interesting to use that as an example, because when I do, the evolutionists jump on it right away and say, well, cars don't reproduce. Somebody produces them. Bingo, somebody produced the cars, and they produced with a wide range. I understand you can get a Honda with 2 doors, or a Honda with 4 doors, or a Honda with 5 doors. Honda probably makes a truck, too. I'm not sure what all they make. But it's coming from a mind of a person who wants to move somebody from one location to another and accomplish a function. If it's a truck, they might want to have the ability to carry some stuff in the back of the truck. So I think you'll find everything about the Honda is designed. Now, it's made of natural materials, most of it, iron mostly, but that doesn't mean it made itself. And plants and humans and animals are made of naturally occurring materials, the 92 elements found in the earth, but that doesn't mean they made themselves. Cars don't make themselves. Somebody makes them from the naturally occurring elements. So they dig the iron out of the ground and melt it down and make iron or steel and mix carbon with it, and then they make cars. Yeah, that takes intelligence to do that. It took intelligence for the 92 elements found in the earth to be created and shaped into the plants and the animals, and finally to humans, were the last thing God created. So you said the Mini has adapted to British lifestyle. Adam, stop and think about that for 5 minutes. You mean the Mini did this on its own? Or did you have some intelligent or semi-intelligent Brits over there try to manufacture a better Mini every time? My uncle had one back in the early 60s, one of the early ones. I'd be willing to bet there are hundreds of improvements on the Mini in the last 50 years. Get a 1960 and compare it to the 2020, 2019, a Mini. Sure, there's improvements. That's because some intelligent people are driving it around saying, you know, it really ought to have this. So they change it. The Mini does not change itself. This is silly that somebody's changing it. And all the changes within the animals adapting to their environment are within very strict limits. You can get dogs that adapt to cold weather and dogs that adapt to warm weather, but you're never going to get a dog that can jump to the moon or fly. There are animals that can fly, but you're never going to get a dog to do that. It's not in the gene code. So sure, animals adapt to their environment, but that's because they're selecting a slice of an already existing gene code. That's not evolution. I suspect my time is up.
That's 4 minutes. Okay, so now we'll have a 30-minute discussion period whereby these two gentlemen will go back and forth with each other discussing the subject of common designer or common evolutionary process. So I'll try to stay out of it as much as possible. You guys go ahead. 30 minutes.
Adam, tell me about the Mini. Did it do it to itself?
Tell you about, sorry, I didn't hear that.
The Mini, did the Mini make these adaptations by itself?
I think you misunderstood my point with the Minis. When I said it had adapted to the British lifestyle, it's probably the wrong use of words. What I meant is it's maintained, because you hear a lot of creationists say that various animals have been around for a long time, whereas some seem quite recent. My point with that is the Mini from the 50s and 60s is still around in its current form. My best friend has one in its current form. That was the point I was getting across.
I'm so sorry to jump in here. Adam, did you want to, I think you were still sharing screen from your slides. Did you want to put just your main logo on? And
I was going to use I was going to go over a couple of things in the slides, if that's all right.
Just for the discussion period, yeah, if you want to go through a few things, but we're just trying to keep it a free-flowing kind of organic dialogue. Yeah. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. But that was my point in that one, Ken. Sorry if I didn't make that clear enough.
No, I think it was what's called a Freudian slip. It was perfectly clear. The Mini was designed, and I agree. I think, and the fact that they didn't have to improve it much proves that the first guy did it pretty good. And I think the fact that the original dogs are still producing dogs 6,000 is evidence of a really good initial design. You have any examples of any animal ever producing something other than its kind?
Kind. Forgive me, I don't really understand what you mean by kind.
Well, if the Bible says if they're able to reproduce, at least initially, they were the same kind. They might have diversified now to where they can no longer reproduce like Alaska rabbits and Florida rabbits. But I think most 5-year-olds could tell you that a rabbit is not the same kind as a watermelon.
So your definition of kind is something that can reproduce, but they might not be able to reproduce down the line.
Well, they initially could reproduce, and there may be diversities that have happened over the years. They may have adapted to an environment that has caused them to no longer be able to reproduce, like the ring species. They take the salamanders and go around, the central part of California, and the extremes can no longer mate. But they're obviously still a salamander. A 5-year-old will tell you that. It's a salamander. Do you have any examples of any animal ever producing something that any honest person would consider a different kind? What is your best example of any plant or animal producing offspring that are fundamentally different kinds of creatures?
Well, if you look at ancient snakes, I've got a picture of I believe it's Najash, or that might be Problematicus. But there's a picture of an ancient snake, and you've got fossils where you see that it's got leg bones. It's also got the skull of a snake. Snakes are very distinctive skulls. Now, you don't get snakes with legs like that today, not at all. How would you explain that in your point of view?
Well, I think in an honest court of law, somebody could point out, Your Honor, he doesn't know that this fossil he's showing had any children at all. You certainly don't know it had children that were different. And why are you thinking an animal long ago and far away that you found in the dirt can do something no animal today can do? No animal today can produce anything other than its kind. So this might be an example of extinction. There may have been a snake that had some type of limbs like that, and it's now extinct. You don't know that this is intermediate between anything. You don't know it had any kids at all. You don't know it had any kids that lived, and you don't know it had any kids that reproduced, that lived, that reproduced. And if this one is indeed an intermediary, who did it marry? Don't you have to have two at the same time in the same place of the opposite sex? You got a whole long list of problems, Adam. You're assuming, you're believing, SpongeBob style, that this is somehow an intermediate because it has little legs, appears to be legs. I don't know what it is. Is it a forgery? Certainly many fossils have been forgeries to try to prove the evolution theory. Study the history of that. Is it an extinct species? You don't know that this is the ancestor of anybody. You couldn't prove that in an honest court of law, at least.
I'm a little confused. You said you don't know if it had kids. Is that what you said about the problematicus of the picture I just showed?
Well, if you find any fossil anywhere, really all you could prove is it died. How could you prove that one had any children that lived? Tell me how you would prove such a thing.
Well, you wouldn't need to prove that specific one. You'd accept that if there's a fossil of a certain animal, that there was a population of that animal?
Well, would you agree that in a court of law, they would say, objection, Your Honor, he doesn't know that. If there's a population of animals and one evolves a special trait, do they all evolve this special trait at the same time? There are billions of cows or millions of cows in the world. If they were going to try to evolve a trait, do all of them have to get it at the same time?
So you're saying, sorry, carry on.
Does one of them get this new special trait and the rest have to die off? This is Adolf Hitler 101. Let's get the superior race and kill off the rest to speed up the process. Evolution, whether you realize it or not, is based upon death being the hero. If this is indeed a superior snake, why are there still snakes today with no legs?
Well, it wasn't a superior snake. As I mentioned with the skinks, the whole reason they're losing their legs is because they're burrowing. What I don't understand, going back, is you said that it wouldn't stand up in a court of law to say that there must have been more than one of these animals alive at one time. Because this animal is there, it's obvious that there's a population of animals like this. That's without exception at all throughout the animal kingdom. I don't understand how that wouldn't stand up in a court of law to say that there were more than just one of a certain animal.
You couldn't prove any such thing. If your evolution theory is true, your whole theory relies on one of them getting a special trait, either by mutations or something, and that trait getting passed on to the next generation.
So you're saying that
over the population of snakes or whatever it is, or skinks or whatever. So your whole theory relies on there being one of them getting this trait and then passing that on to others. Evolution doesn't happen in the present. Science is things we can observe, study, and test and demonstrate. We can observe snakes having baby snakes and skink having baby skinks. We cannot observe any animal having a trait that is new, adds a new feature that is passed on. Nobody's ever seen this. It only happens long ago and far away in fairy tale land. Evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. That's all it is.
How about the spitting cobras example that I showed you then, which is numerous times in the cobra lineage, the spitting ability evolving separately because they're not the same spitting ability, that they operate slightly differently.
Why do you say the spitting ability evolved? Why can't you say they were designed to have different design? There are different types of creatures that fly. There are insects that fly. There are birds that fly. There are mammals that fly. There are fish. Why can't we say the same designer decided, hey, I'm going to give each one of these the ability to fly? There are no cows that fly, no giraffes that fly, no people that fly. If we're the highest evolved creature with the highest IQ on the planet, why don't we be? I'd like to be able to fly, save a lot of time to get places quicker. I think it'd be pretty cool. So if there are snakes, you say, you use the word, I'm sure deliberately, they evolved the ability. You don't know that. They might have been created with that ability. And for the creator to make 5 different types of animals that can fly, and for him to make 3 different types of snakes that can spit, I don't see a problem with that. I think you'll find I bet Honda makes cars with the steering wheel on the right side to drive in Europe, in England. And they make some with the steering wheel on the left side to drive in America. You guys do it wrong, by the way. But
well, we could disagree about that in a different debate if you'd like. Why
that's design, not common ancestor.
Well, let's look at spitting specifically then. Say you make your Honda Jazzes and somebody invents the sat nav. Everyone loves the sat nav. It's a great little invention, and it's really helpful. Why would God give three types of Honda Jazz the sat nav, and not give it to any of the other Honda Jazzes, even though he's got infinite resources, infinite whatever? Why doesn't he give it to all of them? This advantageous ability. And why does he make it these specific ones?
I guess I don't know what a SATNA is. What are you talking about?
Oh, sat nav, satellite navigation. You little.
Satellite navigation, sat nav. Okay. Why did Honda give it to some and not to others? Well, probably it would cost something to put that in the vehicle. Well, even if the cost is minimal, if it costs $50 to add that to a car, they may make it
without cost. I said without cost because God wouldn't have those limitations.
Sure. If you're arguing again from poor design as evidence for no design, which is ludicrous. Take the Porsche that had a poor design. Okay, it doesn't mean there's no design. I don't know why some of them put that in them, some don't. That's maybe you don't need it in some countries. There probably is no place to navigate with by satellite in some parts of the world. Not available there. But again, that would be an argument from ignorance rather than argument for evidence for no designer at all. I think the fact that Honda puts this, navigation systems in some of their cars, that's pretty. The navigation system itself is phenomenally complex. Could not possibly happen by an explosion in an electronics factory. And the Honda's not adding this to itself. God can design anything he wants any way he wants. And we are looking at people today and animals today that are a copy off a copy off a copy off a copy off a copy of the original. It's amazing we can still sit and think and talk. So I think the fact that we're able to move at all is evidence of an incredible first generation copy of Adam. And we have degraded since then. Average person now has 3,500 defective genes, just like my old van out here with 316,000 miles. Well, it ain't what it used to be when it was brand new, but hey, it still works. It's not too bad. And so for the designer to make an original creation with a gene code that can be passed on hundreds, if not thousands of generations and still be working at all. Tell you what, get a computer code, any code, get Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, make a copy of it onto a disk. Then make a copy of the copy. Then make a copy of the copy of the copy. Do that for 500 generations and tell me if it'll still run. It won't. It'll corrupt. The fact that we're having this conversation at all, even if we have a few genetic flaws inherited over the years, is evidence of a common designer, not a common ancestor.
So if we can take a closer look at this, where would you, I mean, obviously you're saying that various different types of Cobra were created, as it were. Where would those created ones be on this this table here, this diagram? Because you got the spitting groups up here, with the most basal group being Naya Atra. Would it be around there where it says 95? Those are essentially, well, for want of a better word, probabilities of the relationship. This was a phylogenetic study which showed the relatedness between these cobras. Do you doubt that, by the way? Do you doubt this study, that all these cobras were related?
I'm curious why you have lines on your paper at all. You don't know, no animal today, no cobra today produces anything but a cobra. You don't know that they're connected in any way with these lines. See, all these lines is back in what's called fairy tale land, long ago and far away. No cobra today produces anything other than a cobra. None. Zero. Just because somebody drew lines on paper, that's not science. Even if they have genetic similarities, that's not proof of a common ancestor. The Honda Prelude and the my Chevy van have 5 lug nuts. Okay, maybe the Honda's got 4. I don't know. But it doesn't prove they both came from a skateboard. It proves that's a design that works. It's a common theme. When Ford first started making cars, people said, wow, this is pretty cool. Let's put an engine in here that'll run off gasoline or diesel fuel. Those are the 2 basic types of cars. It's a theme people have run with and tweaked and improved over the last 150 years and 130 years. And have made some great improvements. I'm glad I don't drive a Model T that you got to crank up in the morning and have hard tires that are going to break when they get cold and hit the bumps. I'm glad you did.
The difference between cars and cobras is you can't do a phylogenetic tree for cars like this. This was done in a laboratory under pretty strict conditions using 5 different genes, and they got this tree out of it. It's pretty in depth. It's pretty solid. A couple of species might be interchangeable here or there, But this shows the relatedness. It shows that these animals are all related and by what degree they're related. At the very bottom, you've got some vipers, the very 4 bottom ones, and you can see that they're very distantly related. They're an outgroup. Whereas all these cobras are pretty clearly related. And we use these same techniques by using these genes to test animals all across the animal kingdom. And we get very similar results. I mean, look at the seals. They're a type of canid. How do we know that? Well, we've tested them genetically. We've also looked at morphological features. Why is it that morphology and genetics both produce almost exactly the same result each time? And why do we get it to such accuracy as well? If they were created, then why is this picture here not 4? You say that these cobras were made separately. I don't know. You haven't told me which ones were made separate to the others. I'd like to know that, by the way. But it's quite obvious from this graph that if they are all related, then spitting has evolved independently 3 times. I don't know how you explain that.
Well, you are assuming spitting evolved at all. And to say it evolved,
it clearly did.
No, it did not. They were created to do what they do. Just the spitting ability is very complex. It involves some type of salivary gland.
Mm-hmm.
It involves some type of muscles to eject the spittle out. It's a very complex mechanism. Just spitting is a complex mechanism. And you said this shows relationship. Adam, I don't know who taught you that, but get your money back. It doesn't show any such thing. It shows somebody can draw lines on paper and connect them. That's all it shows.
Are you saying that somebody just drew those lines on the paper?
I'm saying you don't know any of those animals are related to any other animals. You don't know because today, none of them produce anything other than their kind. Why is it going backwards? They could. Like if we are really related to the whale through a common ancestor like an amoeba, at some point, somewhere way back long ago, the amoeba was able to produce something that was non-amoeba. And you've got all these snakes drawn back to a common ancestor. This is nothing but lines on paper.
I'm very confused that you say that these are lines on paper. I wonder why you say that.
Because I can see them where I'm sitting there, lines, well, maybe lines on a computer. You don't know that any of those snakes are related to any of those other snakes.
I do.
In an honest court of law, all you could prove is spitting cobras have babies that turn out to be spitting cobras. Now, some may lose the ability to spit. Oh, okay. Well, again, that's a losing, not gaining. But you don't know that any of those cobra varieties are related to any others. It could be. Is the Honda Prelude related to the Honda Accord? Or are they both coming from the designer?
Can you tell me how you think that these are just lines on paper?
Today, pick any one of those snakes on that chart. Any one of them. When they have babies, what will they be? Will they be straight line to the right, or will they jump to a new category?
It might divulge into 2. Or diverge into 2, sorry.
Well, you have, I don't know, I want to count them. Say you've got 30 different snakes there. Could there sometime in the future be 40 different snakes because they've diversified? Yeah. Possibly. That's creating a new category that somebody decided to put it in a new category. Maybe this snake has, different features, different color scales on his eyes or something. But you don't know going backwards in the past that these were related. See, science deals with things we can observe, study, and test. This is not science at all. This is lines on paper. This is imagination. This is SpongeBob. This is fairy tale.
Do you know the process of how these are made?
None of them can be proven in a court of law. You don't know that they're related because they have similar chromosome. Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint share thousands of identical lines of code. Identical.
So do you know the process by how these phylogenetic trees are created?
Yes, I know the process by which they put the lines on paper and what they try to look for.
Are you saying this is fraudulent?
Similarities between any number of things and draw lines on paper.
Are you saying this is fraudulent?
What's that?
Are you saying this is fraudulent?
No, I'm saying it's imagination. They don't know. Even if it's true, it's not science. You can't prove it. That's just lines on paper. You don't know that.
This is probably the worst time to tell you. This is my paper. I made this phylogenetic tree. I did this study. I can tell you for a fact that this is not simply lines of paper. This took a year of research, study, and analysis of DNA. This isn't me just drawing lines on paper. I'm actually quite offended that you've just That sounds like you're accusing me of fraud.
Well, do you have a delete key? I would delete all those lines. If it's interesting that you've discovered a lot of different varieties of cobras, that's good research. But it doesn't prove they're related to anything. You can't prove any of those lines belong there. Show me
I can show you all the PCR amplification pictures. I can show you all the work that I've done.
Well, the red category, I can't read it from here, but the ones that have the red line in front of them, you think they're ultimately related to the ones that have the yellow lines in front of them.
Yeah.
Do any of the snakes that have the yellow lines, and I can't read the names from here, do any of them ever produce anything other than the same kind of snake?
Well, would you consider a species a different kind?
I think you started with the assumption evolution has happened. Now let's look for the evidence. Why don't you start with the assumption these animals were created? Let's see which ideas the same creator used in all these different animals. Maybe he used a similar idea. Maybe the Porsche now finally puts a cup holder in their cars. I don't know.
But okay, so say we take that example, and we make these phylogenetic trees of all these animals. They all join like this. At what point do we cut it off and say, right, actually, no, those ones aren't related phylogenetically. We have to get rid of those lines because we think that that's where it starts. Where do we put that line?
I would go to the left of each one of the names and draw a line straight down and say everything to the left of this line is imagination, unprovable. Everything to the right of the line is probably science, observable. The cobra is going to produce baby cobras. We don't know that this is related to anything else. And I'm sorry you spent a year on this. A lot of people have done these kind of charts. I mean, you're not the first. Thousands of people have made charts like this. But it is indeed, Adam, nothing but lines on paper. This is not science. This is
I went through the arduous process of all these species that you see on here. I had scale and blood samples for. And I went through the process of extracting or cutting tiny bits of these scales or using tiny bits of these blood samples and mixing them with buffer chemicals, these chemicals that are used in amplification, putting them through a PCR analysis, which uses electromagnetics to move them up. I could show you the pictures. I could show you the pictures of the unsuccessful ones that they didn't amplify. And I got them analyzed. I cut... You get these big, massive maps on Mega 5 where you have all these DNA sequences, all the A, C, T, G, and they line up. And you see where they line up, and you can start to see, right, that one looks like it's a little less similar. And then you make these phylogenetic trees out of that, which is parsimonious. And this tree was made out of 5 different genes, and they all came to this phylogenetic tree. And you can see how likely the majority of these relationships are. I don't see how you can see that that's just lines on paper that I apparently have just made up. I think that's you accusing me of fraud.
Well, I don't know if you're fraudulent or not. Maybe it's just misinformed. Maybe it's just you're.
I took these from scales. I went all the way from the process of having just scales and blood samples, and I made this tree with them.
Did you take the scales from these snakes and analyze the DNA? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes.
Did you break a scale off the snake and analyze the chromosomes or the DNA? Is that how you made this chart? I think I lost him. Adam, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Okay. So if I think I could analyze Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word and find they have 98% lines that are similar. Okay. That doesn't prove they both came from Morse code. It proves somebody wrote those codes. The same designer wrote the code, and he probably reused some of the same information for snake eyes that are used in monkey eyes or human eyes, because we have 2 eyes, binocular vision, and eyes are complicated. So the same designer used the same pattern over and over because it works. It works great to live in this world. Just like most of the Hondas have 4 tires on them that are round and they're soft and they bounce over bumps. They probably all have a suspension system. That's not proof of a common ancestor. It's proof of a common designer. The purpose of this debate was to demonstrate, does the evidence show common design or common designer or common ancestry? This is lines on paper, Adam. I'm sorry you wasted your time and probably a lot of trees somebody cut down to make the paper you printed it on. But they are just simply lines on paper. You don't know that those are related to anything because they have similar DNA or similar gene code.
Well, in that case, you're free to contact my university where I did this project and say that I'd simply just drawn lines on paper and see if you can get my degree revoked. You mentioned earlier dogs produce only dogs. So what species of dogs do you include in that?
Well, I don't know. I would guess that dog, wolf, coyote are probably related to a common ancestor, and maybe even wolf might have come from the same kind. I would just be taking a guess, but I would guess there were 8,000 original created kinds of animals.
Mm-hmm.
Today there are 339 recognized breeds of dogs by the American Kennel Association. And counting all the other varieties in the world, there may be as many as 500 varieties that anybody 5 and over would put in the dog category. That does not prove, the fact that we have these 500 varieties of dogs does not prove dogs are related to watermelons, which is what your religion teaches.
You mentioned when we were looking at my phylogenetic tree that you cut the lines off before the species. So you don't think that species, you included wolves, coyotes, your domestic dogs in what you just said. Was there ever a point where a coyote was not a coyote?
I don't think there's ever a point where a coyote would not be in the dog family. And I don't know that our current classifications, is lineage, kingdom, phylum, family, King Philip came over for Girl Scouts, class, order, family, genus, species. I'm not sure that our classification system matches God's original design in any features. But if I had to guess, I would put it somewhere around the family level.
But was a coyote ever a non-coyote?
Probably the dog kind diversified, where the coyote is more specialized and recognizable as a coyote, but anybody would still put it in the dog category. So
it wasn't always a coyote?
Well, is a mini in the car category or the motorcycle category? Car. Okay. Now, is the fact that some creationists cannot always tell you exactly where the kind border is, does not prove it didn't happen, and it sure doesn't prove watermelons and dogs are related. Do you believe watermelons and coyotes are related? Adam, if you were to draw lines on paper like you did for this one, with all the animals and all the plants in the world, would they all go back to one common ancestor? Would you have a line on paper connecting a watermelon and a dog?
Well, if you look at phylogenetic studies, everything is related to some degree, and it always seems to match up with morphology. Eventually, very long ago, you'd have the common ancestor of your dogs and your watermelon plants, yes.
So, okay, just so the audience understands, you believe dogs are related to watermelons if you go back far enough in time. I would like to point out for the court, Your Honor, first of all, we cannot go back in time. Secondly, watermelons always produce watermelons. Always produce dogs. There are no examples, none, that can be used as evidence to say anything other than that. So what you've just demonstrated is your religion. You believe very strongly. You believe dogs are related, but that is not science. It's not even common sense. But you would draw lines on paper connecting a dog and a watermelon. I don't trust your lines on paper connecting the snakes either. Yes, you need to get your money back for your degree.
You said dogs only produce dogs. I'd like to compare that to, say if we, hypothetically, we went back to the times of where you've got your Sarcopterygians. I'm sure you're familiar with Sarcopterygians. And you said to me, okay, there's a Sarcopterygian. A Sarcopterygian only ever produces a Sarcopterygian. And I'd say, yeah, you're right. Pretty fair. Zoom back to modern times, and we've got Sarcopterygians that are humans, giraffes, monkeys, and yet they're still Sarcopterygians. Let's zoom forward a few million years or so, and you've said dogs only produce dogs, and then you've got this subset of dogs that are vastly different. You've got this set of dogs that are vastly different. It's the same thing. It's like saying Sarcopterygians will only ever produce Sarcopterygians. Yes, that's true, and they have, but they've got human Sarcopterygians. You got giraffes, monkeys, all your vertebrates. It's nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. What you just said is nonsense. We can't zoom back or zoom forward, and we don't ever observe this, and you don't know that any animal has produced something other than its kind. I would say if we could go back in time to the creation, we would see animals walking around that everybody would recognize. That's the dog kind. Now, it might have produced a variety of dogs with great diversity, from the Chihuahua to the Great Dane. A, they're still dog. B, most of them would not survive in the wild. Most of them, you have to babysit them to keep them alive. Most of the farmers have spent thousands of years developing crops or animals that are specialized to their particular location. There are plants that grow in drier climate and plants that grow in wetter climate. You can get tomatoes for dry climate and tomatoes for wet climate. You can get tomatoes for high elevation, tomatoes for low elevation. They're still tomato, and they're unlikely to survive in the wild. They would revert back to the native original tomato, but they would never change to something non-tomato. You imagine, SpongeBob style, that the dog and the watermelon are related. I feel sorry for you that they taught you that in school, but it's not true. Adam, God created the kinds. God is going to be the judge one day, and you're not going to be able to stand before him and say, well, I looked at the evidence and it convinced me that watermelons and dogs are related. They're going to laugh at you Judgment Day, Adam. You might want to get ready for that.
Gentlemen, we have just over 1 minute left, about a minute and 10 seconds.
So I was going to finish with this one here. The blind snakes I'd like to leave you with. It's effectively blind, but it still has the eyes of a snake that's been covered over by an opaque scale. It's got vestigial pelvic structures. It's got shared derived characteristics, so it's got things that other snakes don't have. So it's a blind snake with eyes of a snake that have diminished over time, but it has features that other snakes don't have. So where does this fit in?
Well, again, you're giving examples of losing something. That's not gaining something.
But it is gaining things. It's got different structures to other snakes.
It's not going to turn an amoeba to a whale. You got it all backwards, Adam. Better think about it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers, Ken. I think we're finished there.
Okay, well, with 30 seconds to remaining, all right, we'll just throw that into the question and answer. Okay, so now we have 2-minute closings from each. So, Adam, when you begin speaking, well, let's see, Kent went first. So, Kent, when you begin speaking, 2 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think I've proven my point that he does not have any evidence that any of these creatures have a common ancestor. I think he's demonstrated clearly they may have a common designer. And that's what the Bible teaches. God said they will bring forth after their kind. 10 times in the first chapter of the Bible. Plants will bring forth after their kind. Animals bring forth after their kind. Birds bring forth after their kind. There are no scientifically observable exceptions to what God said so simply in Genesis chapter 1. Then God told Noah to bring them onto the ark after their kind. There's a website called baraminology.com, which is for the Hebrew word baramin, B-A-R-I-M-U-N. Baraminology.com, which means kind. They've done studies trying to calculate how many kinds of animals are there on land with nostrils that breathe air, like the Bible says Noah had to take, Genesis 7. And the estimate is somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 kinds of animals had to be on Noah's ark. Since then, there has been great diversity. There are 8 varieties of bears in the world. They might have had a common ancestor called a bear. That doesn't prove bears are related to watermelons. There are, I think, now 1,000 varieties of apples that have been developed for different climates, different textures, different taste. They're still apple. They will always be apple. Some may not survive in some climates. There are no examples at all for Adam's religion, and it is a religion that he believes watermelons and dogs are related. There are no scientific examples. What he's doing is asking everybody to teach his religion at taxpayer expense and pass it off as science. It's not science, Adam. Sorry. Watch my video series number 4 for more on that, drdino.com.
You have 30 seconds left, Kent, if you want it.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's what bothers me is that people like Adam and others who really strongly believe in evolution, I don't question. He probably really, really believes this. He might really believe these lines he drew on paper. He probably really does. But that doesn't make it science. And they want to force this off on all the other kids to learn. And it's just not common sense. It's not fair. They're certainly not going to give them any moral foundation for life. If your theory is true and we all came from an amoeba, how do we determine right from wrong on any topic? Is murder right or wrong? Is premarital sex right or wrong? Is sex with your dog right or wrong? Is anything right or wrong? And if you think something is wrong, how on earth are you measuring this with your religion of evolution?
Okay, that's time. So, Adam, I actually got this backwards. Sorry about that, folks. Adam went first, but I guess it's no biggie because nobody's going to forget your closing statement. I don't think. Adam, you have 2 minutes when you begin speaking, sir.
It's no problem at all. Cheers, Neff, and thank you, Kent, as well. It got slightly heated at times, but I think, I'm not here to make enemies. I'm here to make friends, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Just a couple of things. We were talking about the blind snakes, and I said that it had lost the use of its eyes to a substantial degree, and that it had different features. It gained different features from other snakes, but you said that they just lost things, which was, but that's by the wayside now. I think it's quite telling how he said that I've just drawn lines on paper when it came to the phylogenetic tree, which, being that I've done it, I know for a fact that that's not true. I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of stressful moments analysing that DNA to come up with this phylogenetic tree, which it went exactly as I predicted it would. So it landed on my predictions. You said that there would be roughly 8,000 animals. If there were 4 or more types of cobra, like you seem to suggest, that doesn't seem to make sense. And I want to finish on, you seem to argue a lot from common sense. You're saying, oh, you think a dog and a watermelon related, that sounds ridiculous, therefore it didn't happen. Well, go back 1,000 or 2,000 years and stand in what is modern day London and say to the people in the area, I'm going to travel west, and I'm going to keep traveling west until I come back to London. People would have said you're insane. But you know what? It may not be common sense. It certainly wasn't at that time, but it was true. And put it this way, if we just followed common sense all the time, science wouldn't exist. There'd be no need for it. Thank you.
All right, we'll have a closing question and answer session. I think Standing for Truth wants to jump in on this. He's got some questions already loaded, I think.
Yep. It looks like we're just at the hour mark, so I took one question for each debater. It was a very lively debate. Thanks so much, gentlemen. I'll start with Adam's question, and then we'll go with Dr. Hovind's question, and we'll call it a day. So Adam, the question for you would be, what is your best example of a beneficial mutation that is not deleterious and actually adds new information to the genome? Go ahead, Adam.
The mutation that caused the spitting in cobras. I think that's quite a beneficial mutation. It occurred 3 times and developed 3 times in 3 different ways. That seems beneficial to me.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll go to Dr. Hovind then. Your question that I have here is, how do you explain shared genetic mistakes between various species? For example, the vitamin C gulo pseudogene found in apes and humans. Go ahead, Dr. Hovind.
Well, first, I don't know that we can say it's a genetic mistake. We may have to live in the same environment as some of these other animals. I think we do. We all live on planet Earth. So there may be things that happen, catastrophes that happen that cause a genetic a loss of information, like, for instance, the ability to process or to create vitamin C. Some animals have actually the ability to create their own. It appears from the current research anyway, I don't think we know everything about it yet, but it appears that man has lost this ability from a genetic a change that's in a negative direction. Of the millions of genes in the human gene code, the fact that there's a few broken ones is not surprising, any more than making a copy off of a copy off of a copy off of a copy of any computer program is probably going to introduce some loss of information. Never going to put a gain information in there. So losing the ability to process vitamin C that some animals seem to have is not an example for evolution. And the fact that many creatures may have lost this, if apes have lost it and humans have lost it, does that prove we're related? How on earth could that prove any relationship? Could it be something that got into because of climate changes, temperature changes after Noah's flood? I don't know. Could it be that when there were only 2 apes on the ark, they lost it, or one of them lost it and lost it then? But apes are still producing apes. This vitamin C question is not evidence that humans are related to watermelons. But that's what they make incapable of considering anything outside the box. That if there are mistakes in the gene code, I don't think there are. We are a copy off of a copy off of a copy off a copy of Adam, so the fact that we can still talk at all is amazing. But no, the vitamin C thing is, I think, another example of design. The original must have been really incredible if the 20,000th generation is still capable of functioning at all. I think that's amazing.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your answers, both of you gentlemen. I've plugged in both your the links to your channels, Dr. Hovind, Ken Hovind Official, and you as well, Adam. So whoever's listening, if you guys enjoyed, you want to know more about the debaters, please go take a look at their channels, subscribe. But I want to thank you guys for giving us your time today and joining us for this very lively debate.
Well, thank you for having me. Do it again anytime.
Shalom and greetings. So today we got Dr. Ken Hovind and Adam Heap in a debate on the Genesis flood. So I'm going to let my buddy Standing for Truth take over from here.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Praise, for allowing us to use your channel for this really exciting debate. It's been in the making for about a month now, so I'm excited. Everybody's excited. I know the audience is excited. So thanks so much, Dr. Ken Hovind and Adam Heap, for giving us your time, to enjoy this debate on Noah's flood. So it's going to be about the Genesis flood. We're going to start off here with Adam Heap. We're going to have a short intro from Adam, and then an opening presentation from Dr. Hovind. We're going to do a free-flowing discussion for about 30 minutes after that. No interruptions, even times, and then go into a couple short closings, and then just enough time for a few questions from the audience. We'll be going for about an hour till 4. So I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen. If you wanted to start there, Adam, you're good to go. You're muted right now, brother. So.
Right. Hello. Does this work? Can you see me?
Yes.
Sweet. Hello. My name's
Hello.
Adam, and I'm here to learn today. So Kent Hovind is a firm believer in the story of Noah's Ark. I currently am not. So the purpose of this debate, it's not so much of a debate as a learning experience, is a chance for me to play a game of questions with Dr. Kent Hovind. And I have a large list here. So it's going to be a very short introduction. I'm not really bringing anything to the table. I'm letting him do his thing. And then I shall be probing where and how I can, just to check the validity of his claims and all that sort of stuff. So I hope we have a good day today. Thank you, Kent, for joining us. Thank you for the hosts for doing the hosty thing. Thank you, and I hope we have a good session today.
That was it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Adam, you have an accent here. Can you tell me where you're from?
I am from Great Britain.
Great. They still call it that. Is it still great? Is it?
Oh, it's smashing. It should be called cracking Britain.
We have a Scotsman here who's shaking his head saying, no, it's not so great anymore, but okay.
Well, they're Scottish. They do nothing but complain, so.
Okay, I see. Well, if I understand it right, what we're supposed to be discussing here, debating or something, is the question, is the flood story true? Is Noah's Ark story true? Is the Bible correct? And thank you for doing this. And Adam, I was told your MS is in zoology and herpetology, the study of reptiles and animals. True is something that's in accordance with fact or reality. Would it be a fact? Would it be reality that the world was completely flooded and one family built a boat and saved all the critters on the boat? That's what the story says in Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. So is it true? In accordance with actual state of affairs is the Webster Dictionary definition of the word true. Definition of true, something that is real, factually correct, accurate, or provable, as opposed to a lie. The Apostle Pilate said in John chapter 18, what is truth? And by the way, most politicians still have no clue what truth is. Nothing's changed in 2,000 years. The Bible tells us to think about things that are true. And so I don't want to believe anything that's not true. And so if the flood story isn't true, I would sure like to know it. I'm very willing to be taught on this. Let me give you a quick history of where I think this all fits together. In the book of 2 Peter, chapter 3, Peter warned us that in the last days there would be scoffers who would come, who would be willingly ignorant that of how by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. The Bible's pretty clear. When God made the earth, it was standing out of the water and in the water. What does that mean? Well, then it says, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. This world was destroyed by a flood. That's what the book says. Now, is it true? Well, the Bible says God sits on the circle of the earth and he stretched out the heavens. There are 17 references in the Bible to the stretching of the heavens, which explains the red shift and all that, but I want to get up to the part about the flood. I think to understand about Noah's flood and about the ark story, to find out, is this true, we first need to have an understanding of what the earth used to be like according to the Bible. Just like when you study any historical event, like World War II, why did the Germans attack England? Well, you need to know the background behind it. What happened? What was going on here? And so to know the background behind the ark story, you need to understand what was the earth like. It says in the Bible, the earth was formed out of the water and in the water. I believe there used to be a seventh layer of our atmosphere. There are now 6 layers to the atmosphere: troposphere, stratosphere, exosphere, etc. The 7th layer was a layer of water or ice, probably above the atmosphere, probably 6 miles up. Or in your metric system, that would be 10 kilometers straight up. There are some heat sinks up there. As you go up in the atmosphere, you get up a certain altitude, like 10 kilometers or 6 miles, and it's 100 below zero right now over our head here in Lenox, Alabama, where it's 95 degrees out there. So the earth had a canopy of water overhead. It also had water under the crust of the earth. And I cover this on video number 2 of my seminar series. Let me get up here. But the Jews have always taught there was water above the atmosphere. Here we go. Right here. There was also water under the crust of the earth. Most of the flood water for Noah's flood did not come from rain. Most of it came from inside the crust of the earth. Got a globe here somewhere. I did have. Where'd it go? Oh, here we go. All right. The earth today has a crust about 10 miles thick. It varies, sometimes only 3 miles thick under the ocean beds, but this crust of the earth used to have water in the crust of the earth, according to the scriptures anyway. The Bible says in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's. He founded it upon the seas. That means the foundation was upon the seas. And he established it upon the floods. So according to the Bible, the flood water was inside the earth, most of it. Same thing in Psalm 33. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as an heap. He layeth up the depth in storehouses. The depth is always a reference to the sea or the ocean in the Bible. So it used to be stored up inside the earth. Of course, everybody that studies earth science knows there's still a lot of water in the earth. Huge amounts of water still in the crust of the earth, subterranean water pockets. Okay, Psalm 136. He stretched out the earth above the waters. So the original creation had a layer of ice above, I'm just guessing 10 miles up, probably 2 or 3 inches thick. That made the earth like a big greenhouse, protected them, made them have perfect weather, perfect temperature, pole to pole, made the animals grow huge. Gigantic animals are found as fossils that simply are not alive today. They find fossil grasshoppers 2 feet long, fossil centipedes 18 inches long, fossils dragonflies with 5-foot wingspan. They simply could not fly today. Something had to be different. So a canopy overhead, like I think the Bible teaches, would be a reasonable explanation. They had greater air pressure and richer oxygen concentration to allow the insects to get much larger, and probably all the animals to get much larger in that world before the flood came and all this got messed up. There was a layer of air to breathe, probably 10 or 15 miles, and then a layer of rocks to stand on, the crust of the earth. Again, pick a number, 5 to 10 miles. And underneath that was water stored up for this flood. Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning, is fabulous on this, the hydroplate theory, how that there was water in the crust of the earth, and there still is a lot of it. The Bible says in the 600th year of Noah's life, the same day were the fountains of the great deep broken up. Most of the flood water actually came from inside. It only rained for 40 days, but the water kept coming up for 150 days. So it's not all coming from rain. It's not possible to rain enough to cover all the mountains. I understand that. I don't think the mountains were there. I think the Bible teaches pretty clearly in Psalm 104, at the end of the flood, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down, and the water rushed off to fill in the holes. So it's interesting that all the mountain ranges today follow the coastlines. The Appalachian Mountains here in America follow the North Atlantic. The Rocky Mountains follow the Pacific. I think the mountain ranges formed during the last few months of the flood, when the mountains arose and the valleys sank down and the water rushed off. The plates of the earth is broken up into plates. I don't think anybody argues about that. Those plates would be shifting and moving with the weight of all this water on top. while the joints where they meet, the fault lines, was still weak, freshly broken, and they could still move. So the fountains of the deep broke open, and then the windows of heaven were opened, and it rained for 40 days. But the water underneath is really where the flood came from. It came shooting out to the surface along the cracks. The earth cracked up like an eggshell, and we have fault lines: San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault. None of them are my fault, but the earth definitely has cracks all over the place, and some are still moving, and we still have volcanoes and earthquakes along those cracks generally. But the water rushing out during the flood, rushing out of these cracks, would be under incredible pressure, 10 miles of rock. It would go shooting up like a rocket. Actually, a cubic foot of rock is about 160 pounds. That's what, 65, 70 kilograms. This would put 30 tons per square inch of pressure, 30 tons per square inch on the water underneath. It would go squirting out like a, what's the name of that water pressure thing they cut steel with?
Water jet.
Water jet. They make a water jet that'll cut through solid steel. 30 tons per square inch would shoot rocks up into orbit. I think we are still hitting debris from the stuff that was launched off the earth 4,600 years ago during Noah's flood, 4,400 years ago. The other night, we're out watching the shooting stars, and zip, zip, they go across the sky. We're still hitting the debris that were launched off of here. It's scattered in space, and we're traveling around the sun, and once in a while we smack into it like bugs on a windshield. So some of the rocks would launch up from the flood and come back and land on the earth right away. Those would be erased by the flood. You would never see evidence of those. Those that landed near the end of the flood would probably leave a crater, but then most of it filled in, depending on how long it was exposed to water. Like the one in Quebec, Canada, 46 miles across, I think it is, the biggest crater on Earth known. That probably formed during the last part of the flood with a few weeks to go, and most of it filled in. And now it's just a circular lake. But the moon was probably shattered during this time, splattered with stuff coming off the Earth. The craters on the near side of the moon, the crater pattern is very different than the craters on the far side. This would be the stuff that shot past, got drawn back in by moon's gravity, and hit it on the backside. Earth has a lot of impact craters on it. You got some in England, I think, down near the southeastern tip of England. What's that, Cornwallis? No, it's the other side. Anyway, you have craters over there. Here's a Barringer crater in Arizona. I think this would have to be hit after the flood because it didn't fill in with sediments. It's still a big hole in the ground. The flood water escaping from underneath would cause the continents to slide back. Just like today, if you put 2 blocks of rock on top of a spring, move the rocks apart, all of a sudden the spring will bounce up in the middle, and the crust of the earth would do that. The subterranean world, the basalt layers, would spring up into the crack. As the crack gets wider, probably from simple erosion, from the water gushing out, as it gets to a certain depth or width, all of a sudden the bottom springs up. This happens in large mines all the time. They keep digging out the rock. As they get further and further back, all of a sudden the bottom of the mine buckles up just from the weight on the outside. It might be a quarter mile away, but it makes the center of the mine buckle up. You can study all that. So I think Walt Brown is exactly right. The crust of the earth broke. The water came out. The basalt underneath lifted up, causing the crust of the earth to slide away. As long as there's still lubricating water under there, it would eventually grind to a halt when it hits bottom. That explains why we have wrinkled mountains. It's no different than pushing a carpeting up into the wall. All of a sudden it begins to wrinkle up. So lateral movement of the crust of the earth would cause these wrinkled mountain patterns that we find around the world. The earth still has the fault lines on it today. I think all the evidence that we see from earth science and from geology points to the fact this earth was destroyed by a flood. They find fossils on top of Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world. Petrified clams in the closed position. I think I got one here. Yep. When you get petrified clams in the closed position, you know it had to be buried alive. There's a place in North Alabama where they're 10 feet thick, millions of petrified clams, beds of clams, closed. You can go down to the beach 70 miles south there in Pensacola and find 1 million seashells, but you aren't going to find a matched pair, and you certainly won't find them closed. Had to be buried alive. I don't know of another choice. If you got a better theory, I'd like to see it. So here the Bible says Noah built an ark, saved 2 of each kind on board. I'm not sure exactly what a kind is in every case, but two of each kind, probably about 4,000 kinds of animals, plus the birds, maybe another 1,000 kinds of birds, just guessing, had to be on that ark. Then after that, they have diversified now through natural selection and variation within the kind. They've diversified into millions of species, but that's different than kinds. So today, the Earth has ocean basins. 70% of the Earth is still underwater. So if someone asks, where did the water from the flood go? It's still here. It's in the oceans. Just the Pacific is big enough to hold every continent in the world. All the continents would fit in just the Pacific. The Earth today is 71% underwater. Only 29% is above water. And the part that's above water is only an average height of 2,300 feet or 2,600 feet, whereas the depth of the oceans average is 12,000 feet. So today, if you smoothed out the world, push all the mountains down, smooth it out, the water would be 8,000 miles deep, 8,000 feet deep, everywhere. 1.5 miles of water, completely covering the Earth. That water's still here. The oceans today are gaining salt as mineral salts wash off the ground from water and erosion in rivers. And the evaporation takes out the water only, leaves the salt behind. It's a giant distillation process. So the oceans are gaining salt every day, yet they're only 3.6% salt. At the rate they're gaining salt, you would say, hey, this could have happened in a few thousand years. I think during Noah's flood, all the world was fresh water. Noah didn't have to bring water on board. He probably brought babies of all the animals, about 6,000 or 8,000 different kinds of animals, onto the ark. He didn't have to bring insects because they don't have nostrils. God told him to bring those in whose nostrils is the breath of life. And insects can survive a flood just fine. So the flood was probably all fresh water, had all the water they needed, and now it's gradually become saltier since the flood, and some animals have adapted to salt water. We now have freshwater alligators and saltwater alligators, or crocodiles, I'm saying. They might have had a common ancestor called a crocodile. That's not proof crocodiles are related to mosquitoes. So to change, there are saltwater bass and freshwater bass. 1 minute left, okay. So today there is still an enormous amount of water in the crust of the Earth. There are hot water subterranean vents. If there's hot water shooting up into the bottom of the ocean, where does it have to be coming from? Lower than the bottom of the ocean. Like, duh, okay? Tens of millions of these hot water vents are shooting up down there. And there's plenty of evidence of there still being a lot of water in the crust of the Earth. Deep sea hydrothermal vents, they're called, and you can Google that and get a million pictures. So my position is, it is very reasonable, it is logical, it is true to believe there was a flood that destroyed this world. We have evidence of the damage it did all over the place. It is certainly reasonable that all the animals could come from 7,000 or 8,000 pairs of animals on a boat. It is not reasonable that all the animals could come from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, like the evolution theory teaches. It is reasonable that all the peoples of the world could come from a family of 8 on a boat. I think it's very reasonable. Okay, there you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that opening presentation, Dr. Ken Hovind. Thank you for your introduction, Adam. Our next phase will be approximately about 25 or 30 minutes, just free-flowing dialogue. Hopefully I don't have to step in. Your last debate, guys, was actually very respectful, very fun to listen to, very engaging. So I'll leave it up to you guys and start the timer on whoever's first word, whoever wants to start.
Adam, go ahead.
Cheers, Kent. Interesting opening from yourself. If I could compare, if I was to say I had a carrot in the kitchen, and then one day I came home and the carrot was missing. There's the fact. The carrot has gone missing. I could throw out a what-if scenario. I could say the ghost of King Henry VIII came riding in on his horse and took the carrot. Well, it explains it because the carrot is no longer here. And ghost must exist. King Henry VIII existed. So it must be true. That's essentially what I'm hearing here. You're saying stuff and just applying your story to it, but giving no actual evidence to support the claims. One of the things that that was just a response to that. One of the things I want to do, I've got a list of questions here that stray a bit away from the geology. I don't know much about the geology. So if I could go over some of these questions that I've written, I'd love to do that, unless you wanted to continue with the stuff that you started with.
Well, as far as your Henry VIII stealing the carrot story, I think you could probably list every person on the earth instead of Henry VIII. It could be anybody. but I think that'd be a poor analogy. I did give lots of evidence. Okay, it is a fact. Fossilized clams are found all over the world, including the top of Mount Everest, and they're in the closed position. This is a fact. I don't think anybody argues with that. The flood story is a reasonable explanation for that. There are features like Grand Canyon here in America, where the top of the canyon is 4,000 feet higher than where the river starts cutting. The river starts cutting the canyon at Page, Arizona, and you can Google it. It's got an elevation of 2,800 feet above sea level. Well, the top of the canyon is 8,000 feet above sea level. Rivers don't flow uphill. Grand Canyon is a washed out spillway from a giant lake that drained. Go ahead.
What I mean by evidence is a collection of facts that point only to one specific explanation. That's what I meant by the King Henry VIII thing. It explains it, but there's no actual evidence to support that explanation. It's the same with yours. I mean, with the clams, there's all sorts of explanations for why that happened. Why is it your flood specifically?
Well, okay, I would like to hear your other explanations for the clam, but before we get there, keep in mind, we are not demanding that our explanation be taught in the schools at taxpayer expense. The evolutionists are demanding that we all pay to teach their explanation at taxpayer expense. I don't think there's any evidence at all that any animal has ever produced any other kind of animal. There is no scientific evidence that a dog ever made a non-dog or came from a non-dog. But yet all of us are being forced to pay for that religion to be taught in the schools. If we were all forced to pay, Henry VIII came and stole your carrot, I think everybody would object.
Should we pay to teach gravity in schools?
Your religion.
Should we teach gravity in schools?
Say, I didn't understand that. What now?
Should we teach the theory of gravity in schools? Can you hear me okay?
Well, yeah, there's plenty of evidence for gravity. I can show it. I can demonstrate it. We can measure it. 9.8 meters per second, 32 feet per second. I think we can demonstrate it. Can you demonstrate? Can you give me an explanation? Can you show me any animal producing a different kind of animal? That's a topic for another debate, unfortunately, because we. Well, my point is, the flood story is a reasonable explanation, but we're not demanding that it be taught at taxpayer expense. So the burden of proof is not on me. You guys want to demand that we all teach your religion of evolution, and I think that's unfair and probably illegal.
But we're not talking about evolution in this debate. We're talking about Noah's flood. Can I ask my questions?
Noah's flood. How did the clams get on top of Mount Everest, Adam? What is your explanation? Petrified in the closed position?
I'm here to listen to your explanation and decide whether
I gave you mine.
Or not.
I gave you mine. The world was flooded, completely flooded. During the end of the flood, the mountains lifted up and the valley sank down, and so the mountains formed in the last part of the flood. Psalm 104 tells us that. That's a reasonable explanation. We have the clams on top of the mountain, and they're closed. And this doesn't happen any place in the world today in nature. Clams die all the time by the millions, but they don't ever petrify in the closed position. It's hard to get animals to find animals petrifying at all anywhere. But petrified fossils are found in the ground by the billions and maybe even trillions. Fossils are found. They're not formed. How many animals died today in the world or yesterday? And none of them fossilized. The buzzards dragged them all over, the coyotes, the ants. And fossils simply don't form. We never see fossils forming. And yet we find them in the ground by the billions. What's your explanation for fossils at all?
My explanation for fossils is that it's a process of I don't usually do fossilization, so that's not my field. But there have been billions of years for this stuff to happen, and it probably still is happening today.
You're sure there have been billions of years for it to happen?
Pretty certain.
Okay. Well, we don't see it happening today at all. So I don't think billions of years is going to help, okay? If I told you if you kiss a frog, it'll turn to a prince, I think we would all agree that's a fairy tale. But it sounds to me like you believe if we wait billions of years, the frog will turn into the prince on its own. I think it's still a fairy tale. It's not true. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence of any animal.
Can we keep this on Noah's flood, please?
Okay, sure. Noah's flood, the story says, God told Noah, two of each kind are going to come to you, save them on the boat. Afterwards, they got off the ark and spread out, probably from the country of today, Turkey. They could have easily gone everywhere in the world while the the crust of the earth was more exposed, just by lowering the oceans a few hundred feet. It connects everything. I mean, the water between Vietnam and Australia, this water is only 30 feet deep. The width of this room. That's the depth of the water generally in here. So lowering the water 100 feet would connect everything. So animals could easily get off the ark in Turkey and over 100 years walk anywhere. So I think Noah's flood is a really reasonable explanation for why we have billions of fossils, for why we have layers and strata to the earth. During the flood, the moon would be pulling the water up, the high tide, and in order to keep that bump full as the earth turns, the water has to rush sideways to keep the bump full at the same speed the earth is turning. Well, here in Lenox, Alabama, 31 degrees north latitude, we're turning nearly 900 miles an hour. Water going sideways at 900 miles an hour would explain why we have gravel that is rounded off. It was in a big rock tumbler. It would explain why we have layers, stratification. Noah's flood is a very reasonable explanation for why we have stratification, for why we have petrified trees in the standing position connecting all these layers.
Okay.
I'll show you pictures if you'd like.
Is it right if we move on to my questions? I've been begging. I've been
I thought
gagging to go over these questions.
I thought you wanted Noah's flood. Go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah. So I've got a series of questions. The first one being very simple. How big was the ark?
According to the Bible, it was about 515 feet, 300 cubits. And a cubit is elbow to fingertip. Mine's 20.2 inches. The standard Egyptian cubit is 20.65 inches. Everybody's cubit will be a little different. But according to the Bible, it'd make it about 515 feet long and about 85 feet wide and about 57 or 52 feet high, I believe, in 3 stories, 3 floors to it.
Would you agree that would probably be the largest wooden ship ever built?
At the time, yes, it would be the largest that we know of. Of course, according to the Bible, the people before the flood were living to be 900 years old. You could learn a lot in 900 years. Plus, God told him how to build it. There have been many ships built much bigger than that now. The Queen Mary is nearly twice it. What's that?
Are they all? Is it the largest wooden ship ever built?
There was a wooden ship built about that big. They had trouble sailing it because it had 6 sails, 6 masts, and the wind hit them at different speeds and twisted it, and it kept leaking. Of course, Noah's Ark didn't have any sails or masts. It wasn't designed to go anywhere. There was no place to go. It was only designed to float. So it would be more like probably a barge of some kind, float and land. It's only 2. All it had to do is float, protect its cargo, and land. It didn't have to go anywhere. No sailing, subject to stresses of sailing would not be affect Noah's Ark.
Okay. How many animals were on the ark? And considering I picked up some quotes here from the Bible, Genesis 7:2. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Considering later on as well, Noah decided to scrap that idea and just brought 2 of each. Which is the right one? Is it 7s of some and 2 of others, or is it just 2 across the board?
Well, you just read it. It says that couldn't be more clear. There were 7 of the clean animals and 2 of each of the unclean. There are 2 theories about the clean. One is he took 7 pairs. The other is he took simply 7 animals, 7 clean, and then after the flood, Noah sacrificed some of them, which of course would wipe out the species if there's only 2. So the Bible there's no fuzziness about what it says. It says 7 of the clean and 2 of the unclean. Now
then it goes on. It
Go
goes on to say 7:8 of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean and of fowls, etc., etc. They went in 2 by 2 onto Noah into the ark.
Correct. That's what it says, and that's, I believe, what happened.
You just said it was 7s of the clean. You just said it was 7s of the clean.
Okay. I said there's 2 theories. Some people say it's 7 pairs. Some people say just 7.
These are both in the Bible, and it's contradictory.
It's not contradictory. He brought 7 of the clean.
Of clean beasts, etc., etc. They went in 2 and 2. Chapter 7, verse 8. Of clean beasts, and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, there went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark.
Okay, if there are 7, are there at least 2? There were 2 of each kind. There were extras of the clean. I don't think anybody reading that without any prejudice would see a contradiction there. They would say, oh, this is no problem. He brought 2 of every kind of animal and 7 of the clean. That's what it says.
Okay. Let's move on then. All right. The Bible states that 2 of every sort will go onto the ark. What is a sort?
That's a great question. Carolus Linnaeus decided to classify animals, which is what your MS is in, zoology and herpetology. We have our classification system that we've used in the last 400 years based on kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't think God cares about our classification system. He divided the animals up into their sort or kind. That phrase is used 20 times in the first 7 chapters. They would bring forth after their kind or bring forth after their sort. So I think in most cases, a 5-year-old could tell you if 2 animals are the same sort of animal. I think a 5-year-old would know that a dog and a wolf are the same sort or same kind of animal. And I think probably a 3-year-old would know a dog and a mosquito are not the same kind. So I think 99% of the cases, it's a no-brainer. Now, there are some difficult ones, even today in classification. If your degree is in herpetology or in zoology, you would understand. People today argue about which family or which genus a certain animal goes into. There is still a huge amount of argument about speciation. Which species is this? And giving it the proper name. And sometimes they have to bump them around and move them around to a whole new class or a whole new family or genus, maybe not an order. I don't know how far it goes. I would just guess that the Bible term kind or sort is probably somewhere along the line of family, according to our current classification system.
So there's no distinction between the two?
Between kind and sort?
Yeah.
I don't know of any distinction because the words are used interchangeably in the flood story, especially in Genesis 6 and 7. Kind and sort appear to be the same meaning of the same word.
Okay. So have you got any definition for either of them?
Any definition for what now?
For either of them, sort or kind.
Well, that's what I just got done telling you. I think that, do you have a definition for the word species?
Yeah.
Well,
They produce fertile offspring.
Well, are dog and a wolf different species?
Dogs are wolves.
Canis domesticus.
That's a nonsense question.
No, it's not a nonsense. Why are they named? They have a different species name. Canis lupus, Canis domesticus, Canis coyotes. They're different species, but yet they can interbreed. Can you give me an airtight definition of species that never has an exception to it?
That never has an exception to it. Well, that's quite difficult because once you get into like certain bacterias, they don't reproduce in the same way. So you can't really do it across the board because things work with different organisms.
I agree.
But the majority, like your terrestrials and your vertebrates and your invertebrates, it tends to be pretty obvious with some exceptions.
That's exactly. Adam, you're making my point for me. That's exactly correct. It generally tends to be obvious. I think it's obvious to a 4-year-old what the same kind of animal is. I bet if you give me 1,000 pictures of animals, we got a 3-year-old on the campus here. Just turned 3. I'll say, Abby, would you please sort these? Which ones would you say are the same kind? I bet she would get 95% of them. And I bet her 5-year-old brother would get probably 98% of them. So even today, and you know this is true.
So you say that 3 and 4-year-olds can do it. Okay, so if it's that easy, let's have a definition.
It is those that they could originally bring forth after their kind.
How would you decide that? How would you research that?
Today, Alaska rabbits cannot breed with Florida rabbits. They have diversified. They're still rabbit. The Florida rabbits can breed with the Minnesota rabbits, and the Minnesota rabbits can breed with the Alaska rabbits. But the rabbit family has diversified to where some of the branches are no longer interfertile. Mm-hmm. They probably could be induced, in the laboratory or something, but there's enough differences in the cold weather rabbits and the warm weather rabbits that they generally won't bring forth. But so in the original creation, they could all bring forth the same kind. I think a dog and a wolf can bring forth offspring. I think a dog and a mosquito cannot. Neither can a dog and a whale or a dog and a pine tree. So I think in 99% of the cases, it's sort of obvious, like you said, what the same kind of animal is. Now, why would you pick at this straw, strain out this gnat, and swallow a camel? Do you believe mosquitoes and whales are related? You have an MS in zoology. Are mosquitoes and whales related, Adam?
I'm a bit... You haven't actually... You've given me examples, and they're vague at best, but you haven't actually given me a definition. You say a 3 or 4-year-old can tell what a kind is, and yet you haven't given a definition for it. I
did. I said they could bring forth. Originally, they could bring forth...
That's what species is. There you say originally, but that you've told me... You've given me a vague example of, we think that rabbits are all the same kind, but that's not actually evidence. So you need to have an actual definition that we can work with today to bring results.
Okay. Hold it. I need to have an absolute definition. Adam, I'm not making
No, I didn't
everybody.
say absolute. I didn't say absolute. I didn't say.
Okay, yeah, you did say absolute. Okay, but I'm not forcing everybody to pay for my theory to be taught. You think we should all
wait, no. Don't change it again. Don't do that. I want a definition of sort and kind that we can work
I
with
told you.
to decide.
I'll tell you again for the third time. Write it down this time. Those that originally could bring forth are the same kind.
Now, how do you test that? A definition has to be something that you can test as well. You can apply things to.
If I was demanding for my theory to be taught in the schools, then I would have.
Don't do that again. Don't do that again. Stick on the topic. Kind and sort definition.
I want you to, Adam, I want you to see the hypocrisy of what you are doing. You think everybody should teach evolution, don't you?
It depends where it's happening. If it's a PE class, I don't think it should be taught there.
Okay. Should all the kids in public school science classes be taught that evolution is true?
I think they should be taught its current science, not scientific knowledge.
It's the current scientific theory, or it's current scientific fact?
Well, there are facts within evolution. A culmination of facts brings about a theory.
I see you're reluctant to answer
You're
the
trying
question.
to move away from the fact that I'm trying to get you to give me definitions that actually work.
I
can see that you're trying to get me away from it and try to turn it back on me. But we're not talking evolution. This is Noah's flood. We're not talking about evolution.
Okay. I'm showing the hypocrisy. I'm not asking everybody demanding everybody pay for mine to be taught, but I'll give you a definition. The Bible says they will bring forth, i.e., have babies, after their kind. Do you know of any exceptions where any animal has ever brought forth something that was not the same kind of animal?
Well, how can I do that if you haven't given me a definition of kind? How can I give you an example of something that's changed kind if you haven't defined kind?
I'll give it to you again. If they can bring forth. Let's look at all the babies in the world today of anything, plants or animals. Are they the same kind as their parent? Do you know of any that would be considered a different kind? What's the best example you know of?
You haven't defined kind, so how can I answer?
Well, look at the baby, look at the mama. Is this going to come out to be looking and working and functioning the same way as the mama and dad? I think it's the same kind of animal.
Not if the baby's born without legs.
What now? Are there babies born that are not the same kind as the parents?
You just said if it functions the same as the mother. Well, if a baby's born without legs, then it doesn't function the same way as the mother. You haven't defined kinds. You can't ask me to give you an example of kinds, given something that's non-kind, when you haven't given me the definition of kind itself. I've been asking you for the last 10 minutes to give me just one definition, and you've failed to do it.
I've given it to you 6 times. Pay attention, son, or you're going to. Pay attention, son. You're going to flunk my class if you don't pay attention. They could originally bring forth after their kind. If they could bring forth, that's the definition. Can they bring forth? Can they produce babies? Can a pine tree and a whale make a baby? Can a pine tree and a mosquito make a baby?
Can a bearded dragon and an iguana? Can a bearded dragon and an iguana?
Iguana?
A bearded dragon and an iguana.
No, that's a good question.
How about a royal python and an anaconda?
I don't think an anaconda and a bearded dragon can make a baby.
What about royal python and a European adder?
No. There are about 60 or 80 different families within the snake category. Maybe it's more, maybe it's 100, but certainly there are not millions. I think all the snakes in the world could probably be put into 100 different kinds.
How do you know that?
I'm just picking a number for sake of the argument here. We could look it up exactly.
What gives you that number? What gives you that number? Why do you settle at 100?
Well, it's reasonable to work with. It's reasonable to work with. Do you think a snake and a elephant can bring forth a baby?
Why are you bringing an elephant into this? We're talking snakes.
I'm trying to get you to see how stupid the evolution theory is. It's retarded. And here we are all paying for this to be taught to everybody, and it's insanely stupid. It is not true. I'm defending the flood story as being reasonable. It is reasonable to believe God made animals to bring forth after their kind. Noah brought them onto the ark after their kind. And today they're still bringing forth after their kind. That is very reasonable. I think I win the debate. That was the purpose of the debate, to defend the Bible story. Show me an example where any animal brought forth something other than its kind.
So you said kind was it brings forth after its original kind. How do you find what the original is?
I've told you 7 times now, son, I think you flunk. Okay, take the class again. If they can bring forth, they are the same kind. Here's Webster's dictionary. Kind, sort, variety, class, a natural group or division. Did you say, could the animals be naturally divided into division into birds and reptiles? They could be naturally divided. Could they be divided with fish? Can fish be divided away from birds? Can they be naturally divided?
Can I give you an example of a, have you ever heard of Morganucodon? Which is a...
I can't understand you. Example of what now?
Morganucodon. It is a...
I didn't hear you.
It's a reptile. Morganucodon. It might be Morganusodon.
I'm sorry, I did not hear what he said. The computer gone?
The name doesn't really matter. It is a reptile that has fur. It's got the gait of a lizard, and it's got the jaw that's halfway between lizard or reptile and mammal jaw. Is that
you have a
mammal?
A reptile with fur? Wait a minute, Adam, slow down now. You're a zoologist here. What is the name of the reptile with fur, please?
Morganucodon.
How do you spell that?
Morgan. You know, like the name Morgan.
Okay.
U-C.
U-C?
Odon. So yeah, O-D-O-N.
Morganucodon is a reptile with fur, you're telling me. I've never heard of this. I will look it up. Now, if there are some strange ones like the duck-billed platypus that we don't know where to put them, would you put the duck-billed platypus in the same kind or in the same species as anything else? Is there anything similar to a duck-billed platypus? Or is it
put it in the same species as anything else? Well, no, because it's a species unto itself.
It's a species unto itself. Very good. So we can classify animals. How do we classify animals at all? If evolution is true, there should be a blended variety from the amoeba to the whale with everything in between. Why can we even classify them at all? Noah's flood story is very reasonable to answer that. They came onto the ark after their kind. They went off after their kind. They've been making babies after their kind ever since.
Okay. How do you classify red and green?
Good question.
Take the color spectrum and classify red and green and make it distinguished.
Right. Somebody has to all the scientists have to get together and agree this frequency will be called green. If it varies too far from that, we'll have to call it something else. But there's probably a blended infinite number of colors between our 7 colors we've chosen to set as the standard: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. So indigo violet. So I think we have set standards for saying this is red, a certain frequency, but there's 10 million shades of red, and they gradually fade into the other colors. I understand.
Exactly. Gradual fade,
now,
right.
Adam,
we get back onto Noah's flood now, please.
Do we see the same blending between elephants and snakes? Where is the animal that's 96% elephant? Where is the animal 96% elephant?
If possible, I think we've strayed off topic. Could we go back to Noah's flood?
I'm just going to
You don't want to answer that question. You made up the color story about the red and green. I'm asking you, where is the animal that is 96% elephant?
If you can answer that question, Adam.
Well,
I can show you a color that's 96% green.
No, you can't.
I could show you there's a blending between green and red. I don't think you can show me a blending between snakes and elephants. I think you're making it all up. I think it's a stupid theory.
And then I'm just going to step in real quick here. So looks like you've, on your question, Adam, about kinds and related questions to that, looks like we spent a while on that. I've got some things written down from Dr. Hovind's opening presentation. We've got exactly 4 minutes for the discussion portion. Do you have any objections to anything that Dr. Hovind said in regards to the canopy, fossils, the evidence that he gave for a global flood? If we want to spend the last few minutes on those things instead of kind.
I'd like because I've only gone through like 3 of the 20 questions I've had. So if I just get some quick answers to some of the other questions. Okay. That's why I'm trying to get it back. So I've worked hard on these questions and I've hardly been able to get any of them.
Of course, yep. And take as much time as you need if you want to ask your question and not spend too much time, I guess, arguing on one question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So, Kent, how long was the vessel at sea for?
The battle at sea? What is that?
Oh, no, the vessel at sea for.
Well, according to the Bible, Noah got in the ark and then a year and 2 weeks later got out of the ark. However, it says in the 7th month, it landed. it took 5 months for the earth to dry out or the water to run away or the crust of the earth to quit shaking around. So Noah was at sea for probably about 6 or 7 months.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. How did Noah account for lull and roll of the boat? Because I imagine there's probably a lot of turbulence, water turbulence. You probably got at least a sea state 8 or 9 throughout this whole thing. How do we account for lull and roll of the boat, considering that keels weren't invented until the Vikings?
Well, if you study what they have discovered in Turkey that they're claiming is indeed Noah's Ark, let's see, it's on part 3 of my story. They have found 12 giant stones. They call them drogue stones, D-R-O-G-U-E. The drogue stones apparently were held under the boat hanging by ropes. Let's see, the Ark, I don't know where that is. I have to find the slides. If you watch my seminar series, but they found 12 of these rocks. They weigh about 9,000 pounds apiece. They apparently were held over the side of the boat, hanging on ropes. Drogue stones, they're called. I'll show you pictures. If I had the question earlier, I'd get ready for it. But what would happen if you had rocks hanging around the boat, big rocks hanging on ropes, the wind would automatically turn you perpendicular to the waves. You don't have any roll because you're facing the waves head on. It's called a drogue stone. These have been found. They're in the museums over there in Turkey, where they have the Turkish government built a visitor center where they claim Noah's Ark is, what the remnants of it. If you watch my video number, here it is right here. Video number 3, the drogue stones, slide number 148, 148, enter. This is one of the drogue stones here. The Vikings carved crosses on them when they came through there. Not the Vikings, the Crusaders. They said, man, this is from Noah's Ark. These rocks weigh about 9,000 pounds, 4,000 kilograms. The hole in the top is larger in the center than it is at the exits on both sides. Apparently, there was a rope through there with a knot in the middle, so it can't chafe the rope and go back and forth. Ships today in the Sea of Galilee, use drogue stones to hang them over the side of the boat. During stormy weather, drop the rocks down in. It stops the roll from happening because the rocks create drag, effectively a sea anchor. Here's an example of what it might look like. If it gets really windy, the boat would be automatically turned perpendicular to the waves. You hit them head on. So there is no roll at sea with a boat with drogue stones. Simple solution. I mean, people today can figure this out. Noah was 600 when he built the boat. I'm sure he figured it out, and he did it under the instructions of God. So the answer to your question is there were probably big rocks hanging all over the boat, drogue stones, they're called, and that would prevent, there was no roll.
Okay.
Ships today.
Can I move on to my next question?
Navy, ask the Navy of your country, do they try to always hit the waves nose on? Of course they do, because you don't want the roll. So Noah didn't have to have any steering mechanism at all. The wind is going to cause the waves. Waves are always perpendicular to the wind. And so by having the side of the boat itself catch the wind, it's going to turn it perpendicular. It's going to hit them head on. There will be no such thing as roll on the Ark.
Okay. Moving on then. What was the next question? So I've mentioned water turbulence. Obviously, what would the water turbulence be like? What would be the sea state?
I didn't understand that. I speak American, not English. But what was it?
What would have been the sea state? Sea state goes 1 through 10. 1 is like the water is like a mirror. 10 is the waves are 50 feet high.
Well, that even to this day, right now, this moment, it varies from 1 to 10 all over the world. I mean, some places it's a 1, some places it's a 10 right now. So
well, considering the conditions
of
Noah's flood, what would the
there's no way to tell. I think Noah was in calm water the whole time and didn't have a problem.
Calm water, despite the fact that all this water has been displaced.
Oh, yeah. There's water when they had the earthquake in Indonesia in 2004, all the landslide underwater made a huge tidal wave that killed 250,000 people. We didn't feel a thing in Pensacola, Florida.
Wait, so you said earlier that the water was jetted so much that debris was flung into space. The entire world was flooded, and you think
right? And within an effective radius of that crack, you would get enormous problems. But see, Noah was outside of the danger zone from all those cracks.
Okay.
Prove I'm wrong.
Right, ancient Mesopotamia would use what we now call keleks at the time of the supposed Noah's flood, which ships.
You've got 20 seconds, gentlemen. So I guess this will be your last question. Adam,
yeah.
ask away.
Okay, it's all right to just finish off this question then, despite the time limit.
Of course, yeah. Ask that question, and we'll allow Dr. Hovind to respond.
Right, okay. So the question overall is what kind of boats would be around during that era? So obviously you've got ancient Mesopotamia, they used keleks, which were ships supported by inflated animal skins. The Egyptians had only just started making boats that were able to enter the oceans, and they were made with bits of wood or papyrus, and they were tied together with rope, and all the holes were filled with reeds. How would you, in the times where this is the top of technology, the absolute top, how would you expect a boat to be at sea for over a year in, you say the seas were calm, but they wouldn't be, turbulent waters, with a wooden ship bigger than the biggest wooden ship ever built? How do you account for that?
Well, first of all, he was at sea for 7 months. I already answered that. Secondly, he was 600 years old. He'd be smart enough to think of this kind of stuff ahead of time. Thirdly, God told him how to build the boat. Fourthly, we can't prove it was in calm water or rough water. You're assuming the worst in every scenario because you don't want to believe the Bible, do you, son? You want to reject God's clear teaching of the word, and I understand that. That's your option. But worse yet, you guys want all of us to pay for that stupidness to be taught in schools. I don't think that's fair. But I think Noah's Ark story is told very clearly and succinctly in the Bible in 3 chapters, Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. Jesus claimed to believe it. Millions of people around the world have claimed to believe there was a worldwide flood. 330 flood legends now have been found from cultures around the world that had no connection with each other. There's certainly a lot of history about a worldwide flood. So to answer the specific questions of exactly how tall were the waves when Noah was, sailing 6 months and 3 days after the storm started, I don't know. Doesn't matter. But there are storms going on right now, probably hurricanes right now hitting Thailand or something. They're not affecting us over here. It's a big world. And it's very reasonable for there to be really horrible waves and storms and perfectly calm outside an effective radius of that. That's simple inverse square law.
Have you ever been on
radius?
Have you ever been on a flat bottom vessel in Sea State 4?
Oh, I don't know if it was flat bottom or not. Why would you say that? Because
keels weren't invented until the Vikings.
Keels weren't invented. That's in our modern history. That's post-flood. Noah's Ark apparently did have a keel. They found it. Let me show you here.
There weren't any keels known until the Vikings, which were...
Well, that's because they're not studying Noah's Ark. They found the keel up near the mountain, Mount Ararat. This is a volcano. Mudslides and lava flows have pushed the Ark down, but it tore the keel off. It was actually full of ballast stones. Noah's Ark had an effective keel because it's still there. Go over and study it in Turkey. You can go see it for yourself. There are ballast stones in it right now, and it's ripped off the bottom of the boat. The boat has slid down 17 miles from 4,000 miles of earthquakes and mud flows. So just because the Vikings finally refigured it out doesn't mean there wasn't one before that. People were 900 before the flood. I think you're stuck with the dreaming assumption that people today are smart and ancient people are stupid. That's starting with the wrong premise. Ancient people were smart. We can't build the pyramids today. We can't lift a 2,000-ton stone up in the wall of Machu Picchu. We have no way of lifting it. They knew something we don't know.
And I'm just going to stop it there, gentlemen. I think that's the perfect way to end the discussion. We're going to go right into your quick closing, Adam, just a minute or two. And then Dr. Hovind, same thing. Thanks so much for the discussion. Very engaging, a lot of fun. Audience seemed to enjoy. And then we're going to go into a really quick question and answer before this hour is up. We've got 2 questions for each of the debaters, so it'll be nice and quick. We'll start with you, Adam. You've got a couple minutes. Say what you need to say, and then we'll go on to Dr. Hovind to give his final thoughts as well.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of questions that I didn't get to go over. At various points, he tried to bring it onto evolution when I made it clear at the start. That's not what we were talking about. We were talking about Noah's flood. And every time he got cornered, he said, well, I'm not the one pushing for this to be taught in schools, which is a bogus defense. It's not even a defense. It's just trying to avoid any sort of answer. I could have gone over things such as what did Noah do about the insects? I mean, the Bible verses said that everything that was living was destroyed on the earth apart from that which was on Noah's boat. I didn't get to answer that question. What did everything eat on the ark? What did they drink? Where would this be stored? Because obviously on a boat, you'd need it to be central. You need everything to be central. Where's all this weight distributed? Did anything get sick on the ark? When Noah made the sacrifice of an animal after they landed, did he wipe out an entire species? If animals microevolved after the flood, like he says they do, and we got the great diversity of life after the flood, what would life look like in 100 million years from now? What happened to plants if they went on the ark? Because if there's a flood that destroyed everything on Earth, surely we wouldn't have plants anymore. Why don't all animals show a genetic bottleneck at the time of the flood? It's something we simply don't see. Why were there civilizations such as the Egyptians completely unaffected by the flood? Why does the Chinese calendar start in 4717 and wasn't interrupted by the flood? What about dinosaurs? What about Tiktaalik and Morganukdon, which I mentioned earlier? Were they on the flood? How soon after the flood, if they were on the boat, were they killed off? Were there any animals left off of the ark? Why is the last common male human ancestor estimated to be about 340,000 years old as of latest estimates, whereas it should be in the region of 4,000 something years old if we were to believe this story? And my last question would have been, why does all modern science disagree with you? I didn't get to answer any of these questions because he kept diverting and trying to place the blame on me. But I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much. My name's Adam. I hope I've done you all a good service tonight. Thank you and goodbye.
All right.
Okay, well, Adam, go ahead, Dr. Hovind. Sorry.
Okay. Adam, thank you for doing this. I've been turned down for debates about 8,000 times. Most people don't want to defend their religion in front of somebody who may be able to answer them. And by the way, every question you asked here in your last closing here, I think I can answer. And let's do this again sometime. And let me get the questions ahead of time, and I'll put a slide presentation. I answer all of them in my seminar series, which you can get from drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O, or you can call 855-BIG-DINO. Go to extension 1 and get my whole series of tapes for $50. It's 18 hours. After you watch it, you can return it and get your money back, minus the shipping. I don't know anybody who does that. I mean, we're trying to win the war. So all these questions get now. Adam, I guess I would have a question for you. If all these questions could be answered satisfactorily with a reasonable, logical, scientific answer, would you then say, wow, the Bible's true, I'm going to accept Jesus Christ as my Savior? Or would you go around looking for 50 more questions? If you're a hypocrite, you would keep looking for 50 more questions because you wouldn't want the truth to be known. But if you're really sincere, honest, intelligent individual, you'd say, okay, wow, there is an answer. I think I'll accept what the Bible says. I think the flood teaches, Bible clearly teaches there was a flood. There's no question about that. Jesus certainly believed in it. He quoted it many times. There are 350 flood legends around the world. Something had to happen for there to be a legend like that. 70% of the earth is still covered by sedimentary rock, which is flood-borne sedimentary rock. Rounded gravel worldwide. I'm in a gravel pit here. We have billions of rocks. They're rounded off. Rock tumbler, Noah's flood. The ark has been found. They've studied it. They've measured it. They've looked at it. It's made of 3 layers of laminated wood, about 4 or 5 inches thick. There are polystrata fossils found all over the world. Petrified trees standing up, connecting all these layers. We teach all those layers would form in one flood. Get a jar of water, add sand, gravel, rocks, mud, and shake it up. It'll settle into layers in seconds in your hand. Hydrologic sorting would happen because of Noah's flood. There's enough water on the earth right now to cover the earth 1.5 miles deep. It's not a question of is there enough water. During the flood, it was probably all fresh water. It's gotten saltier since then. Noah didn't have to bring water on the ark. They could drink out of the ocean. Time's up. Oh, rats. A Chinese calendar. I'll get to all of them next time, Adam. Hang in there. But remember, if I answer them all, I want you to get converted, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Hovind. Thanks so much for a great debate, gentlemen. So we're just going to go into a really, really fast-paced Q&A here. I've got 2 questions for each of the debaters. So I guess I'll start with Dr. Hovind here. The question for you is, how does Kent explain the ordering of the fossil record? For example, no whales in Cambrian layers.
Well, I would say, first place, there is no such thing as a fossil record. There are fossils, billions of them, possibly trillions. Fossils indicate rapid burial. The bones are still articulated. They didn't get dragged around by the woods, by the coyotes and the buzzards, etc. So there is no fossil record. It is us putting our interpretation on them. If there's any sorting at all, and it's not a clear sorting like they would like you to believe, I think you would generally find birds on top, because birds are the last ones to drown, and when they drown, they have hollow feathers and bones, and so they're going to float to the top. I think we generally would find clams at the bottom, because clams are already at the bottom when the flood starts, and they have solid shell, and they're heavy, and they can't run very fast. They're going to be the first ones buried. So I think if there's any sorting at all, in some areas there is sort of a sorting. It's based upon body density. It's based upon mobility or intelligence. I think if you Google what is the body density of the average reptile, you'll find it is different than the body density of the average mammal. So they're automatically going to be sorted by density. Hello, it's simple physics 101. Of course, things are sorted by density. So I think if there's any sorting at all, and it's not like they would like you to believe, the fossil record and the geologic column, if there's any semblance to it, it could easily be explained by a Noah's flood. A worldwide flood would answer all of that without a question. Okay?
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, Dr. Hovind. So this question is for Adam. How does Adam explain the existence of living fossils, for example, the coelacanth and the Wollemi pine? Go ahead.
Well, when something is suitable to its environment, then there's no pressure for it to change. You see this in a lot of body forms, like fish, for example. Fish have been around for many, many years. And it's as simple as that. If there's no need to change, then there's no need to change. Sometimes things will diverse a bit and then come back into the previous environment and go back to what they were before. It's when they enter new environments or new situations that they'll start to see the change. So, of course, you're going to get some creatures that spend the vast majority of history in very, very similar environments, either because those environments are large and don't change very much, or because those environments can just shift and the animals can follow. Of course, there are different examples. For example, when you get an island splitting off, or animals landing on an island, say from the mainland, that creatures adapt much quicker because they're in different environments. That's my answer to the question.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I appreciate that. Next question, I'll just read this word for word for Dr. Hovind. The questioner in the audience asks, in the Bible, how can the first day and second day be literal days when the sun and moon were made on the fourth day and evening and morning were made on the first day?
Well, great question. If the sun disappeared right now, blew up, left the galaxy, left the universe, we could still have a 24-hour day, because it's how long Earth does Earth take to spin around one time? That is a day. A day is defined as one spin of the Earth. Whether there's a sun or not doesn't matter. Now, it just so happens that half of the day, 24-hour day, is lit up. We call that day also, daylight. Half of it is dark. But it could be one spin of the Earth in relation to anything. The Earth could be spinning in relation to the pole, some star someplace, or in relation to anything. I think God purposely made the sun later in the creation week. It's only a couple days later. It's not a big deal. He purposely made the sun later so we would know not to worship it. It's just a necessary object. Oxygen's necessary too. You got to have it, but we don't worship it. Water's necessary, but we don't worship that either. So the sun is neat. I'm glad we got it up there, but it's not something we should worship. And most cultures of the world have fallen into the trap of worshiping the sun of some kind, like the atheist Aaron Ra, the sun god, he calls himself. So I think God made it later just so we'd know not to be so stupid as to worship the sun.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Dr. Hovind. So we got the final question here for Adam. Adam, the question is, how does Adam explain the sediment layers, and that we see quick or no erosion between layers, and we see complete rock layer sequences deposited rapidly in abrupt succession? Go ahead, Adam. Oh, did you get that, Adam? Are you on mute?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was just in the middle of saying I am not a geologist. I have no idea. I don't know how rocks work. I do not know how rocks work. So if I said anything, it would be ignorant. Born of ignorance.
Okay, I can allow a quick last response
can I say,
from Dr. Hovind there if you'd like, and then we can...
Can I say something about his previous response then, if he gets something?
Sure. If Dr. Hovind wants to respond to that one real quick, and then you can do a quick response to Dr. Hovind's question, and then we'll call it a day, gentlemen.
Yeah, I think sediment layers are very easy to explain by a worldwide flood in the days of Noah. You can make sediment layers, we make it in a jar in a matter of seconds. I can show it, watch it happen. So that's real science. Science is things we can observe, study, and test and demonstrate. I think we could demonstrate with a scientific experiment that animals would automatically sort themselves, dead animals, based on body density, habitat mobility, etc., and that sediment layers can be formed rapidly. There's a video called Experiments in Stratification where they show sediment layers 10 or 15 at a time being deposited horizontally. The atheists are saying the layers on top are younger than the ones on the bottom. I say, you got to be kidding. If this one's younger, did it come from outer space? How can any layer possibly be younger than any other layer unless it came from outer space? All the layers are the same age. They were just reshuffled at the time of Noah's flood, but they don't want to believe in the flood. Peter hit it right on the head. They're willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood because it represents the judgment of God. So I don't think there's no such thing as a fossil record. The sediment layers all formed during Noah's flood. They're all the same age. And petrified trees in the vertical position are proof of that. And I show that some other time. Go ahead.
I just want a quick word on your density decides where something lands in the layers. I looked up earlier today spiders, and you have Sicariidae, which is found in the Neogene strata, which is some of the top layers of rocks. You also get spiders Aterococcus, found in Devonian strata, which are much, much further down. This alone is a clear contradiction to your idea that everything is sorted by density, because they're both spiders.
Well, I can answer that very simply. During the flood, there would be areas that would be inundated for a while, and then if the crust of the earth flexes up and down, like it would normally, then that layer may be up and exposed and dry out, and then it goes down, and new layers are put on top. If all of the strata were formed at the same time, you would be correct. I said all of the strata were formed in the same flood. That flood could deposit things where you'd get the denser object stuck in the top because it was during the last part of the flood that it finally got settled there. I think it's very easy to explain how things could be out of order based upon a flood lasting a year and the crust of the earth flexing up and down. So right here in our gravel pit, we have 5 layers of gravel, clay, gravel, clay, gravel, clay. You guys saw them today. That would be formed by each tide. Each tide coming in would form a layer of gravel. And then when during high tide, when it sits still, small stuff settles out and makes a layer of clay. You can Google stratification, and you'll see it all over the world. Let's see, 264. We have the little thing made out of sand right here. You flip it over, and it makes multiple layers in a matter of a minute. This doesn't take a long time. These little sand toys, you can buy them at, I don't know if you have Walmart in England, but they make multiple strata very rapidly. So there's no such thing as a geologic column. It's one of the dumbest ideas we've ever taught to kids. I taught earth science 15 years. There is no geologic column. The stratification would be because of Noah's flood, and there may end up being some layers on top, just like these 2 densities of sand, blue and white. They're going to sort into multiple layers. Here, the black and the white are different densities, but it doesn't just all be black at the bottom and white on top. It has to do with how the water moves around. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that response, Dr. Hovind. Awesome Q&A, guys. The debate was very enjoyable. I want to thank you both for giving us your time. I know you guys are very busy. So as usual, it was a blast, guys. If you want to say some final words, if you want to promote your channels or whatever, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, where do I find this recording? It's not on YouTube, is it?
Yes. Adam, it will be. This debate will be uploaded on my channel, Standing for Truth, probably in the next 30 minutes or so. So I can send it along.
Adam, are you talking about this debate we just did? It'll be on his channel and our channel, Dr. Kent Hovind Official. But the Experiments in Stratification is called Experiments in Stratification. It was done at the Navy flumes in Colorado, where they test stratification so they can know where to hide their submarines and stuff. Experiments in Stratification. Okay?
I just want to say thank you, Kent. Thank you, Standing, and thank you, Praise. It's been enjoyable, and I hope you'll have a tremendous evening.
Well, thank you for coming doing this, Adam, and I hope you have a tremendous eternity. I hope you get all this straightened out and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, because the Bible is true. And not only, the Bible says the scoffers are ignorant of the creation and the flood, they're ignorant of the coming judgment. And there's a judgment coming, whether you believe it or not. I'm trying to help you get ready for that. So Jesus died on the cross to pay for your sins, and if you'll accept his payment, he'll move inside and make a whole new person out of you. It's wonderful. Come visit Dinosaur Adventureland, Adam. I'll give you a tour, show you around the place, and we'll get you converted.
If you could pay for a flight, that would be lovely.
Can't do that. You get
Okay.
here and we'll feed you and house you.
Amen, Dr. Hovind. Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. Praise, if you want to have a final word there and shut her down, brother.
Yeah, this was awesome. I appreciate Dr. Hovind coming on, and Adam. It was a pleasure for me, and I would like to do this more often. These type of debates are really interesting and fascinating. So I want to say thanks to everyone coming in here and participating in the chat, and I want to say God bless and see you later.